here. Are we all here? I think we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, we're here. So, Human Resources Committee, first thing up, any questions on any staffing items? Anyone? Member Oswald.
I just had a question about the certified appointment with the non-certified leaves. Does Miss Yang have her teaching license? And if she does or does not, I mean, she's been a para, so why hasn't she been a teacher?
And we actually started last year with her also as a community expert in that position. Mm-hmm. So it's a position. Pardon?
Is it a variance?
It's similar to a variance. It's basically for a non-licensed. Variances you can only get for licensed individuals to have another part in the field. This is for, I mean, mainly these are for hard to find type positions. You'll see them more in some of our industrial trades and some of the languages and that, but it is, yes, it's similar to a variance.
Thank you.
Member Harla.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how many retirements we have so far. I see that we've got it. I know the date kind of came up, and just wondering where we're at with that number.
That was one of the things I was going to give you a running total on, and I will at the school board meeting. I'm sorry about that, but we're coming in almost daily. We're getting some, so it's a double-edged sword, but it's good. So.
Thank you.
Member Welty.
Thank you, Chair Sandsted. One question. I know that sometimes I've seen teacher husband-wife combinations retire at the same time, but we've got a certified resignation, 2 people from Myers-Wilkins with sharing the same last name, or at least in part. These are mid-career leaves. Can you give me any clue as to why both of them decide they have their child involved or something like that, or that too private?
You might actually know more about this than I do.
They're in Hong Kong right now.
Yeah.
They're living in Hong Kong.
Oh,
They took a leave to. I was one of Jay's main substitutes and Sarah's substitutes,
really?
And so when they left the district to go teach internationally, and they started out in South Africa. And then took, renewed for more years and moved to Hong Kong, and they love it there.
Cool.
So, and I have a Facebook message out to them if they really, really do want to go. I haven't responded yet, probably because it's midnight over there or something. But
do you think we'll get them back with all that rich experience that they're accumulating?
I'm going to beg them back, but I don't think they'll come back.
One of the interesting things is they actually used to team teach. Now, I shouldn't say team teach, but they each did half-time. So.
Member Laflakamp.
Yeah, I just had a question about on the bottom of page 3, non-certified retirement. Tamara Smith, the integration specialist. Are we going to replace her for the last part of the year, or kind of her workload or her student load? Yeah.
We did a temporary till the end of the year hire. So we did a temporary posting, and then did a temporary hire off of that posting for the end of the year. So it'll be rehired for next year. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right. Seeing no further lights, we can move on to the policies. This is actually the 3rd time we've looked at these because we had a big change the first time. They went for a first reading, so now we're on the second reading of these policies. And let's see, page 5 is the proposed policy that we've sort of modified from, pages 4 and 5 are the working draft after we've made changes to the MSBA model. So, Member Harla.
Thank you, Chair Sandsted. I'm just wondering, I know there was a lot of discussion over the last, this is our 3rd reading of this, right? Listening to Member Oswald and others talk about this, just calling this section our bylaws, right? I just want to make sure that I'm But I want to make sure that I hear, and I think that it makes sense for us to just make sure to do that so that we are in line and in step to have this portion be listed as our bylaws, just so that they're uniform. And I'll defer to members, to Chair Sandstead on this, but to me that it made sense so that we're not jumping from all different hats.
And that is the discussion we had at the very end last time, was to think about this in terms of bylaws. And I do see that we have a change in the language here on page 4 from last time. So the heading under number 2 says general statement of bylaw instead of general statement of policy now. So there is that is one change. Are there any other changes?
What I'm realizing now, though, is we actually should underline those or highlight those so you do know what the changes are. So up in that first Roman numeral number 1, we did use the word bylaw. And then in the title, the general statements of bylaws. And yeah, general statement of bylaws.
Yeah, it probably should be plural.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question related to that.
Go right ahead. Member Oswald.
I'm concerned about the general statement of bylaws as you're just renaming the general statement of policy. Would the general statement of bylaws actually have different things listed in them?
There's some other 200 series also that will ultimately come this way that talk about the operation of the school board, which I believe would be bylaws also. So once we migrate everything that way, we're just kind of doing it some policies at a time.
Okay, and so then in the general statement of bylaws, like they mentioned in B, as described in this policy, would it be as described in this bylaw? In B?
Yeah, we might have missed one more policy. All the policies we were trying to get into bylaws. Yep.
And I just want to say thank you for addressing my bylaw concern, although I do still have an issue with including the negotiating committee because I don't see it referenced in 213. So I'm not sure how that fits.
Yeah, we still have on page 5, section 3D. There is still the language there regarding the parameter setting, but there isn't a separate discussion of or a listing of a negotiations committee. Member Johnston.
Yeah, I don't like the way we did the bylaws. I think that, first of all, bylaws don't refer just to a school board. They could refer to anything that any organization would say is bylaws, which have a higher hierarchy than do policies. And as a school board, we have not ever addressed that. And I've long, since we started this process, I've long said that I don't think we're doing it in the right manner. Here, I guess a case in point, when we should be, first of all, describing what our bylaws are. What are they? Do we even want to have bylaws, for example? We currently do, and I do think that we're putting the cart before the horse. Again, this is, I think this policy 213 is just a case in point why we should be doing a different process, why we should be looking at all our policies and our bylaws and looking at them all together and not just picking one out here and one out there and doing it. I think we should do it all.
Member Johnston, your concern is again noted. Do you have any more specific discussion on this proposed policy?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
The 2000 series, we as a board have not designated that as a bylaw. The agenda item says that All the 2000 series will be bylaws, and we just can't just say, okay, all the things we did before are suddenly bylaws. No, that is not the right way to do things. We got one other item here that I was trying to pick out. Another case in point would be so I find the right number here. Policy 8015, which is where our current committee structure is, which is on page 11. That was not a bylaw before, it was a policy. Now suddenly we're changing this to be a bylaw. I mean, I don't have any problem with making those changes necessarily, but I think we should be consistent and we should do it across all our policies and all our bylaws, not just, again, I think we're at the point here where we should start really looking at this as a whole, and I think this is one of the reasons why. Superintendent, you had a reaction? Go ahead, and I got one more point.
Superintendent?
And yes, currently the 8,000 series is school board operations, and then now 9,000 series is listed as school board bylaws. And I think we have some crossover because of the recommendations that came from MSBA to show that there was cross references between those policies, and so it was in theirs. So in bringing it in 200s, they don't recognize it as bylaws, and so that's probably where the crossover came. But our bylaws are currently in the 9,000 series.
Yeah, and 8,000 is not. That's kind of what I'm saying. We're not being consistent here. I think we should do better on that. I'm opposing deleting 9045, the negotiation committee, for a couple of reasons. Is that when we talked about this 2 months ago, that was decided that was going to be taken out, and now suddenly it's got back in again. I don't understand why, because I thought we already agreed to take it out, and I will not support this if 9045 is in there. And I don't think that the 3D is the same as 9040 or 945 bylaw was, and of course also another reason why I think that we have to keep that in there is if you look at the model policy and back on page 19, one of the standing committees is negotiation committees, and I think we should stick with the negotiation committee, and if we can't decide on any other language, 9040 or 9045 should stay. I would agree with the model committee, and I think as negotiation committee is one of our most important functions. I think we should have a committee on that.
So just to clarify, Member Johnston, you want to include the negotiations committee in the list of the standing committees on the proposed 213?
Yes, okay. That is. We could do that and have the verbiage as a 9045 included if necessary down on a D, but not the languages there.
Thank you for the clarification. Member Harlow.
Yes, in looking at what other larger school districts do across the state and having attended that negotiation seminar, where being in having a negotiation committee, even of one, opens us up to potential to folks for making it a public meeting. We all sat in on that piece. I think that where this talks about all of us setting parameters and as it relates to wages and benefits of various employee groups, that's what places like Minneapolis and St. Paul are doing, and other folks. And so we don't run into open meeting law concerns. I'm supportive of it staying as D, and that we as a board don't get into the muck of the negotiating piece, but really are setting the parameters for our administration to do that like they do with all the rest of the bargaining groups. So I'm in support of the information as is from our Minnesota School Board Association training.
Member Welty.
I guess I have a quick reaction to Member Harlow's comments about how other large school districts do things. We are our own school district, and we have the right to operate under state statutes as they are spelled out, and I'm not positive what they all say at this point, but we have a wide latitude as to how we go about the negotiation process, and it's something that we as a school board have to work out ourselves. I believe we're having a meeting tomorrow, closed meeting, to talk about parameters. That might be a good time for us to talk about how we wish to go about making negotiations, but I'll say what I think I said a while back. For the time being, I want to hang on to the bylaws as we currently have them, because I'm not interested in altering the negotiations or setting up the negotiations process in such a way that I find myself as I was situated 4 years ago when last we had them.
Member Welty?
Yes.
If we were to, would you support the new bylaw 213 and the elimination of all of the others other than 9045?
213 being the negotiations committee, or which one?
213 being as
5.5.
written or as we alter it on pages 4 and 5, and then elimination of everything else other than page 17. Is that something that you would support at this time?
Well, let me just check. How do members Oswald and Johnson feel about that?
I think this was essentially in line with what Member Johnston proposed, was keeping 9045 and making some small changes to 213.
I'll certainly take a look at it, certainly consider that. I'm nervous, though, about, again, taking our bylaws out, but I'd take a look at that at the verbiage. I think we went verbatim, I'll have to look at that again, but I thought that we took the bylaws that we were going to delete and added them in there. Am I correct on that, or was there any changes on that?
Mr. Swirsky.
Pretty much everything except for 9045.
Yeah. So I would certainly consider that. Yeah.
Member Oswald? Member Johnston, will come to you next.
Sure.
I was just had a question on the proposed bylaws to be deleted. They have legal references of MSA 123.33 and .34.41, and those aren't noted in the new proposed policy. Should they be? I'm looking on page 12 and 13.
You know, I think on page 6
And
there are
14.
some
But it's not
references,
the
but not-
MSA one,
yeah.
legal references.
If I could chip in there, I think that those are old references anyway, because they don't sound familiar. All the new ones have 123B on them, so I'm thinking they're probably not current
What
anyway.
does MSA stand for?
Minnesota statutes annotated.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Member Johnston.
Yeah, just to comment on Member Harlow's concern about the open meeting law. I just wanted to say that if we have a concern about open meeting law, that means we probably are kind of going down the wrong track, and we don't want to say, for example, if we wanted to eliminate 9045, which I'm hoping we don't, but if we wanted to do that, just because we're concerned about the open meeting law, I think that's the reason why we should keep it, because we don't want to get into a scenario where let's not have this meeting because of violating open meeting law. So again, it's okay to have 3 people, but not to have 4 the whole board. That means I think we should just be meeting as a whole board and an open meeting. In most cases, I think that, and I think if I recall the MSBA presenter, I forget his name on that, said in most cases you probably want to. It's better to have meetings in the open anyway, except for actual negotiating parameters, but once you get beyond that, you should. So just some comments. I don't think that they would demean actually says that's why we should keep 90-45.
Okay, Member Harla has a clarification, then we're going to Member Loeffler-Kemp.
I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. So we are able to do the closed meeting for the parameter setting. What I'm talking about is the piece is when we are sitting on both sides, and that's a public, for the discussion portion is public as it was before, but the meet and confer, when caucuses, when our staff move to caucuses, it's like caucusing over what your next move in poker is going to be and showing everyone your cards. And I think our cards are super important to show. And once we make it through the negotiations process, that's important. But unless both sides are public, it puts favor on one side. So in order for us to, bargain in that process, we don't want it to be that piece to be a necessary open meeting. That part isn't necessarily an open meeting in standard negotiation. So that's just why I would support that. So in favor of everything coming out in the long run, but for the purposes of that, having our board set the parameters and then having administration do the caucusing.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, so if board members who don't like D on page 5 and feel we need to keep 90-45, help me understand what is missing or why you feel D doesn't allow us to do negotiations in good faith.
Member Welty, do you want to speak on that? Or you
yes, I would, as a matter
of
fact. Not quite what I was going to talk about, but I'm not satisfied with the suggestion that we decide the parameters. Perhaps in future negotiations that would be a wise thing to do. Perhaps that's what other large school districts do. But I think with this particular negotiation that we're heading into, I'm not satisfied with that. I'm not willing to set the parameters and then only have reports back. I would like to have there being school board involvement in the discussions, or at least have a school board member as a fly on the wall during the discussions, during the contract talks. It has been suggested that we are put at a great disadvantage with the open meeting law by Member Harla if we have school board members present, so that would allow other people to step into our closed caucuses afterwards. I have had a long conversation with the superintendent about this, and there may be a difference of opinion statewide. MSBA's primary source for information on this felt that nobody could be kept out, and our attorneys, as perhaps some other attorneys have suggested, that there's no way that makes sense. And I don't know who would be right legally, and I suppose the only way we could find that for sure would be if somebody were to take somebody to court and the court were to rule whether either the MSBA's top negotiator is correct or our attorneys are correct. I just know that I would like to have some school board members present during the negotiations. And I do think we can have a little conversation about what our strategy is, as well as parameters tomorrow in the closed session, so we can feel each other out. But for the time being, I don't want to set us on a collision course with each other about what we're going to do. I don't want to really foreclose any opportunities, but give us a chance as we head into the parameter discussions to try to figure out how we want the school board to be represented during these negotiations. And then once we've agreed or come up with some kind of consensus, proceed, but I don't want to be handcuffed by whatever policies we're considering now.
Member Welty, I'm sure administration can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my guess is that we're only allowed to discuss the setting of the parameters in a closed meeting, and our process throughout negotiations is something that we have to discuss in an open forum under the open meeting law.
Well, then I've already stated my preferences to how I would like us to proceed with some school board involvement, and rather than no intervention other than the parameter setting. And that will be my point, and that's how I would vote when it came time to
Just
decide.
to clarify that we're not going to be discussing the procedure during closed meeting. Yeah. Member Johnston.
Yeah, just to add on, you asked me if I'd be okay with, if we took that out. I think I would be, but there's one thing that I would suggest. I do have concern about our bylaw question, and I guess I would suggest making the bylaws back to policy as a model policy says. I just don't think we as a board yet have discussed what bylaws really mean to us, and I don't think we should be going down that road yet. So that would be the other thing I would suggest is putting bylaw, the word bylaw, take the bylaw out and put it back as policy.
Well,
until we make that decision.
Member Oswald, how do you feel about that, given that this change was made based on your comments last time? To put you on the spot.
No pressure. I understand all of the concerns that have been said. I do have a concern that, we just replaced a word versus what defined what a bylaw is. So I'm hearing what Member Johnston has to say. I personally am fine with this being a bylaw as it is, even if we didn't have a general statement of bylaws included, as long as it was labeled a bylaw. But I wouldn't want to replace the negotiation committee's bylaw yet until we have a clarification on what bylaws are. I mean, do we want to have a completely separate number for bylaws? Do we want to have, a different system for bylaws? I myself just know the importance of bylaws more than I do policy, that, you pay attention to your bylaws first. So I know they're more important, but yet I'm still learning too. And so I'm fine with it as long as we don't take out the negotiation ones, because that's the one that's under contention right now, and we certainly can delete it in the future and amend policies to fix it later. Mm-hmm. That's my take.
Yeah, and of course the distinction on bylaws in terms of voting is that it requires a 2/3 vote. So if this proposed policy if this is proposed as a bylaw, it'll require 2/3 to pass. If it's proposed as a policy, it'll only require 50% to pass. Mr. Swirsky or anybody else, do we have any other 200 series that we have approved thus far?
Not that we've approved, but
Okay.
there are others.
So we could decide that the 200 series is going to be bylaws, and when we're reviewing in the future, we could decide whether or not to include something in 200 or renumber it to make it policy. And that would be consistent with where we're at right now.
Yeah, and they all relate to how the school board operates. That's what I know for sure on that.
Any other examples that we looked at? Some of those districts did list the 200s as bylaws. Mm-hmm. And they used the model policies, but just referred to them as bylaws.
Thank you for that clarification. Member Welty?
Just in rereading 3D, depending on how you look at this, this doesn't say there is a negotiations committee, and of course we're contemplating getting rid of the negotiations committee, or maybe not. But it just says, for the purposes of negotiations, all members of the school board will participate in establishing parameters as it relates to wages and benefits of the various employee groups. I don't see how anybody can argue with that. The question I have is does this somehow imply that this is what the negotiations committee does and that that's all that it does? And I don't know that we have policies that really explain anything other than that. There's nothing wrong with that. That makes perfect sense. The only question is, to what extent does this tie the hands of school board members in trying to figure out exactly how they're going to do the negotiations? I interpret this as being wide open, and that the school board, for each committee or each negotiation session, has the right to figure out among themselves what they're going to do to proceed with the negotiations. And perhaps that's a little bit too wide open, and perhaps we do need to have a negotiations committee mentioned. Maybe it's not a standing committee of the school board, but somehow which I'm fine with this for the time being. We're kind of wide open here about what we do, but this really doesn't seem to give us a very rounded sense of what exactly a negotiations committee, if there is such a thing, will do, or how we proceed with the negotiations. And to the extent that as we approach these negotiations, we're wide open, I'm fine with that, because I like us all by consensus to come up with some sort of a strategy and to have school board members present.
Member Loeffler-Kemp.
Well, I was just going to read D again, so thank you, Member Welty, for reading it out loud. And I just wanted to make sure, as this discussion was happening on D, that this has been our practice, is that we as a whole, all school board members, have helped establish parameters. So that's not a new thing. That's been the practice since I've been on the board, and I just want to make sure everyone understood that. Thank you.
Member Kirby, if you can hold on for a second, I have a proposal that might satisfy. Since it's appearing to me that there aren't enough votes to eliminate 90-45, which is a bylaw, so it would require 2/3 vote to eliminate it. So if we're keeping around 90-45 for the time being anyway, the negotiations committee, I think it makes sense for sort of the cleanliness of our bylaws and policies to move 3D, this parameter setting language, to 90-45, so that we've got all of the negotiation stuff in the same place. And then we would pass 213 as a new bylaw and keep 90-45 as a separate bylaw. I think that might appease the masses. Member Kirby.
Thank you. I think that maybe it hasn't been lost, but the board does vote on the final contract. We have the final say when it's all said and done. So it's not that the board does not have any say if they haven't been on the negotiations. I think that it is potentially crucial whether or not a member is at the caucus discussions, because if that is an open meeting, then the other side can come and hear what we're doing. On the other hand, we cannot go into their side because they don't have to abide by open meeting, which makes it a very much of a disadvantage to the school board. So I think it's crucial to know whether or not having a board member in those meetings makes it an open meeting.
And I think what we've heard is that there's disagreement on that.
Do we need to get that resolved, I think, somehow? I mean, I think that...
Superintendent?
Yes, I would agree that there's disagreement. There was one person at MSBA who suggested that it would be open, and then both Beth Storsley and someone at the Rupp firm confirmed that they disagree, and they made several citations of cases where it wasn't, where a meeting that had one board meeting was not a public meeting. And so there's, but like I said, there is that disagreement, and so the board would have to decide which they believe would be the most reasonable case for that. I think that there was much more citations and much more support that the attorneys offered than was offered by MSBA. I will say that, as a body, you set the parameters for negotiations. And we take those parameters and then we cost out things. And when we're having discussions about language changes, we also cost out those language changes and make sure that anything that we're putting into the negotiations is all costed out and stays within those parameters. And strategy is also discussed in that closed session. So if there are certain strategies that you as a body want us to use while negotiating, those are things that we could also talk about in closed session. I see it as really administration's role to to negotiate and to get us to the place that fits in your parameters, and that those parameters that you set would be, something that all of you are comfortable with. If there's one or two of you within that, I wouldn't want anyone's personal take on what those parameters or negotiation strategies should be to guide that. It should be a voice of all of you. And I think the only place that you can do that is within that closed session, discussing the parameters and the strategies that you want us to use, and then hand it to administration. We negotiate. We get to a place where, either we need to come and talk to you more about exactly what did you mean about these things, and then we go into closed session and discuss that again, or we come to you with a tentative agreement that is within those parameters, and we come to you and we say, is this what we heard you saying? Does this fit all of your parameters? So really, nothing moves forward without the board as a body approving it and giving us direction. So that's kind of my view on this, is that I think the most important thing that we can do is in closed session set those parameters and any specific strategies that you want administration to use in negotiations, and then really the role of administration to go into negotiations with all of the groups. So with that, it's my recommendation that the team is just administration.
For the meet and confer. Member Johnson.
I really don't think we really have a lot of disagreement on really any of this. I would say why I want to keep 90-45 is that I want the school or a negotiating committee, and I think it should be part of the school board. And because of what's happened in the past, I think that's why I want to keep it, and hopefully we can find some better way. But having said that, I don't expect to be sitting in the negotiations as a school board member. I look at this as just a committee. It doesn't say all 7 of us are going to be sitting around negotiating with the union. I don't want to do that. I mean, I can't because I'm a union guy and I'd have a conflict of interest. I don't think I even could if I think it would be fair. And some of the rest of us are probably in that same situation. So I don't expect to be there. People that are, Member Welty wants to go sit in and be a fly on a wall, like he says. I want him to have the right to do that. And now we as a board would have to decide, do we want to have 4 people there? That would mean we would have to comply with open meeting law. I don't think that 4 of us are probably going to want to do that, but Member Welty has often said he does, and I certainly want to make sure that Member Welty and any other members, if it goes over 4, we're going to have to sit down and hash that out as a board, but I don't think it would probably happen. So I don't think we really have an issue here myself. So again, back to your question, I'm certainly fine with keeping 90-45 in there as a bylaw, and the parameter setting. Hey, that's what we're going to do here. In 2 days anyway. So that's what we've always done. I don't think we necessarily need to have that codified. That we're going to have the committee, the whole meeting, was a special meeting, whatever we got going on that.
I have a question on 90-45. States that the negotiating committee shall obtain the necessary certification of representation. Certification of representation. What does that phrase mean here? Anybody?
I believe right now what it is when you are negotiating with a certified committee, you have these letters that are going back and forth that are saying we want to enter into negotiations, and so there's just sort of a process to it. It's fairly informal versus formal, but it's...
And is that something that, if we eliminated this bylaw, is it a problem that that language wouldn't exist anymore?
I don't believe it would, essentially. There was a closed session a number of years ago, and the question came up like, what does this policy mean? Mm-hmm. And what came out of that, and there was no vote on it, but it was just kind of a mutual agreement, was that verbiage that the school board members will participate in establishing parameters. So that is what came out of that interpretation. Now, a lot has happened since then, but that was the intent at the time.
So to just clarify, Member Johnston, if we keep 90-45, it's not consistent with what you just described in terms of our involvement, because beyond the necessary certification language, it says that the negotiating committee, of course made up of school board members, would be in charge of wage negotiations and meet and confer meetings. And it's sounding in general like that's not what has happened, and what you would agree that the board members would not be in charge of the meet and confer. Is that
my understanding is that you're kind of reading it too literal, and certainly the way it's been interpreted is since I've been on the board, the negotiation committee has never been in charge of what you're talking about. I think there's a kind of what you mean by in charge of. I would say in charge it means we're sitting in a closed meeting and setting parameters. That is confidential. That's what I would say in charge of. And then we would say, as a board, we would say, okay, we will give the superintendent authority, or the Mr. Hassler the authority, or some preferred attorney the authority to do our talking with us, if we wanted to do that. That's what I would say in charge of, not necessarily doing the actual negotiation. Does that make sense, what I said?
It does, but I just don't think we need to keep that language if that's not what we mean by it. You know, if we have the opportunity here to modify this, and if it doesn't, if the words don't match how we do things, then we should change the words to match what we do.
Well, I think in charge of wage negotiations, I think that is what we do. And that's, we have in the past. I don't think we would be changing. I think we're still going to do that, because I think being in charge of means appointing or directing the superintendent or the CFO to do that. So I don't, I'm sure we could find some better verbiage. I guess I'm not prepared to have better verbiage on this, but I certainly am not opposed to that idea.
Yeah. That's my thought, is that, yeah, there's got to be a better third way. Member Welty, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like your idea of moving that 3D section from the first one we looked at on parameters, putting them here. Perhaps we could simplify the negotiations committee, keep it, but simplify it this way. The negotiating committee shall cut out everything to the word be. So the negotiating committee shall be in charge of wage negotiations and meet and confer meetings with employee groups. All members of the school board shall be members of the negotiating committee. That does not necessarily require that they all sit in on negotiations. Maybe that would be the parameter setting, but it would not deny individual members of the school board to participate if that would be the wish of the school board at whole, because obviously the school board as a whole will adopt the contract and is essentially in charge of setting parameters and dealing with the employees in negotiations for contracts. So I would suggest at the very least to eliminate obtain the necessary education, the necessary certification and representation, and just get rid of that and have the negotiation committee be in charge of negotiations and meet and confer meetings with employee groups. We can keep that next sentence there, so we're all going to be hopefully working together to figure out exactly how we're going to proceed with the strategy of our negotiations this time around. And then we can also keep the issue about parameters here, perhaps append that to that last sentence. All members of the school board meeting shall be members of the negotiation committee meeting in terms of determining the parameters.
Right. I think that's, I'm just thinking how this would flow better. I think if we keep 90-45, it would be All members of the school board shall be members of the negotiating committee. For the purposes of negotiations, all members of the school board will participate in establishing parameters as it relates to wage and benefits of the various employee groups. The negotiating committee shall direct the wage negotiations and meet and confer meetings, period. I think that would cover including everything, but better state what we actually do.
Sounds good.
Member Loeffler-Kemp?
Actually, Member Harlow was before me.
Member Harlow?
I'd actually been looking for clarification on what you had just said, so Member Loeffler-Kemp,
Yeah.
I can comment.
I guess rather than us trying to wordsmith this right now, I guess I'd be more comfortable with, if we're still undecided, which I think we are still undecided if we're keeping it or not, if we maybe have some recommended language, if Mr. Swartzky, you could see if there's some language that's out there from other districts and to help us kind of think this through more. And again, I don't know if we're decided yet that we are keeping this or not, and that we're striking D or not. I don't know if we've came to consensus on that.
I don't think we necessarily did, but I also didn't see the numbers necessarily for a bylaw change, which is what this would be. Member Harlow.
Okay, thanks. I needed a minute to process what you were just saying in this. One of my questions is if we were all in favor with updating 9045 with this updated language, it would make sense to just update the language for D as Member Johnston had stated. That being said, I wouldn't be in support of saying directing the meet and confer portion, because the specific piece of directing meet and confer is not, we are directing the parameter setting and setting that place, but not the specific conversations. The conversation, like, there's so much that goes into that. So I'm 100% for setting the parameters, but not being the ones to direct it, to direct the meet and confer session. So direct the parameters, not meet and confer. And then I think it's the meet and confer that we're all running around about right now.
Right. Does anybody have a better suggestion?
Yeah.
I don't like the in charge of, and I think you're right that directing is not the right language.
How about charge administration with direct negotiations and meet and confer meetings with employee groups?
Member Oswald?
I just would like somebody to define parameter setting versus meet and confer. I'm getting them all jumbled in my head.
Sure. Superintendent?
Parameters are really the money amount can be anywhere from here to here. Meet and confer is part of the negotiations process. So we come together as a group, and that part is open. Anybody can come into that meeting where the union and the negotiating team are sitting together. And then often there's offers exchanged. If the union is giving the district what they would like to see, then we go into meet and confer. So we separate and we talk about as a negotiating team each of the points on that offer and what we might counter offer or what our next strategic move would be in negotiations. So that meet and confer is more of a strategy meeting. And then we come back together and there's another cross offer and either conversation continues or we say, you know what, we need, there's times that we say we need to go back and talk to the board about this. This is outside of our parameters. And then we come back to you, we go into closed session, we tell you what's going on and get your input on that. So the parameter setting is kind of putting the framework around the whole thing. And the meet and confer is, kind of the huddle on the side where we're talking about strategy and the next move.
Right.
Not to use a sports analogy.
So to follow up with that, does the way the language is currently in the current 9045 allow for board members to be in the meet and confer? Or is it interpreted that we're just overseeing that you're doing meet and confer? How is the interpretation of this current policy read by you guys that are in charge of the policy?
To me, I know what the intent of that was that administration was going to do the actual negotiating and meet and confer, and the board was going to set parameters. Reading this, I don't think that's what it says.
So we need to clarify that. That's right. So I agree there needs to be changed language. I don't know what that language should be. Because I think we have differing opinions on what that should be. But I don't know. But I know what needs to be clarified.
Superintendent, we had a question over here about the caucus and where the term caucus comes into meet and confer.
The meet and confer and the caucus is kind of the same thing.
Oh, it is?
Well, caucus, but then, go ahead.
I mean, to me, the meet and confer is when the two parties are sitting together, exchanging proposals and or ideas. And the caucus is where each party goes off on their own and discusses what has been discussed at the table, and if there's an offer out, you know, what do we think of that offer? Are we ready to accept that? If not, what's our next move? And then you go back and the meet and confer is then when you exchange ideas and proposals with the other team. That's my idea.
Okay. Sorry. So, to sort of bring us back here, I've forwarded the proposal that we passed 213 essentially as is without 3D, and we modify 9045 as follows. The negotiations committee. All members of the school board shall be members of the negotiating committee. That language from 3D then, for the purposes of negotiation, all members are part of parameter establishing. And then the last sentence, this is from the superintendent's suggestion, the negotiating committee shall direct administration to engage in wage negotiations and meet and confer meetings with employee groups. That doesn't exclude school board members from those, but it does say that essentially administration is going to be managing those portions. Member Welty.
That's how I would interpret it, and based upon that interpretation, I would support the language that you've just suggested.
Okay. Yep. The last sentence would be, the negotiating committee shall direct administration to engage in wage negotiations and meet and confer meetings with employee groups. Member Johnston.
I don't accept your last sentence. To me, that seems like it could be interpreted to exclude school board members if we wanted to participate in some part of it. But just a suggestion for process. I know Member Sanset and Member Welty, I would almost suggest that maybe you guys sit together and as a subcommittee, whatever you want to call it, and come back with us at the next meeting, either in a week or even next month or something, because it seems like you all know where we're coming from, and I would say hammer that out without us. It's a full committee taking that whole time.
Well, Member Welty just said he was fine with the language.
Okay, I guess that last sentence I'm not then. Yeah, I think that does leave it out. So I guess I like your other language. I just didn't like the last sentence. It was really fine until the last sentence. And
Well, if you have something to offer as an alternative, that would be welcome.
No, just take it out. It's not necessary.
Member Welty.
To address that concern, I think we could just put one last sentence. Such a committee will not necessarily exclude school board members, or words to that effect. In terms of originalism, something that you probably studied in your constitutional law class, the Supreme Court is always going back trying to figure out what the original Congress that wrote the Constitution meant. We just heard our chair suggest that the language he gave us would not prevent a school board member from being a part of the negotiating committee that we're setting up, that we direct the administration to set up. And that's a pretty powerful indication of what the language in your thinking means, and I think for as long as some of us continue on this board, we will remember those words.
And it's being recorded for all of posterity.
That's true. That's true. The public knows that that's what we talked about.
Yeah. Member Harla.
I guess I'm going to go back to, it sounds like there's enough folks that are supportive of this that now that we took it out to talk about it just being 9045, it could fit back in and that we would just have a clean 213. So to move what you've said from 9045 into be item D, and then it's one piece rather than having to steeplechase around our policies and bylaws.
Anybody have any thoughts on that, making it one policy?
Bylaw.
One bylaw, thank you. Member Johnston.
If you do that, you have to add A4, which would be negotiating committee.
But it's not sorry.
Superintendent?
I see standing committees as being committees that you meet every month, and I'm not sure negotiation would fit in that.
I would suggest we look at letter C down there, the school board chair, well, forget that language right now, but the school board chair shall appoint members to each standing or ad hoc committees and designate a chair therefore.
Member Harla?
I think also, it would be, it's within the setting of our groups. We have a number of other committees, and it would be redundant to say it in both places.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that if we include all of the language from 9045 in section 3, but not in A because it's not a standing committee because it doesn't meet every month, that everybody's okay with that. Member Johnston.
No. Again, I disagree with the superintendent's interpretation of a standing committee. Looking back on page 19, just reminding everybody here we've already varying extensively from what the MSBA model committee is, and their standing committees are audit, policy, building and grounds, and negotiation. We only have, my suggestion is we keep negotiation in that, and because we haven't done the other three, we're not doing. So I think that we should keep. My point is not to add audit. I gave up on that, even though, or the policy, I gave up on that. I do think we should keep the negotiation committee in there for that reason.
Member Welty.
I think that it makes perfect sense to remove D from 3 on page 5, because this has to do with the appointment of committees, and as we take a look at the negotiations committee, or 9045, essentially that committee is, the whole school board is the committee. They decide the parameters, and then they direct the administration to do something else according to the verbiage that you've just offered us, Chair Sandstead. And I don't think it needs to be mentioned in that first one on appointment of committees, because we're treating it as its own separate committee, which is all of the school board to begin with. And so that's how I would read all this.
So just to clarify, Member Welty, then would you keep it as a separate 9045, or would you put it under 3D?
Probably either.
Okay. All right. Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Superintendent?
If I could complicate things yet again, how will that committee then be determined?
What do you mean be determined?
You know, if you're saying that you're charging administration or directing administration to, I can't remember how that wording went now, and then it says, but it wouldn't, I can't remember what Member Welch said, wouldn't disallow a board member from being on it, then how do we determine
I think
who
that
is?
Member Welty acknowledged that we didn't need any extra verbiage at the end, because we are all in understanding here that that would not bar members from participating, or from being present, flies on the wall at meet and confer.
But not a caucus. Or, because that was really
That is a question.
that is the crux, because that is exactly what the MSBA is saying would then be an open meeting if there is a board member in it. That's where that discussion is, not in the actual meet and confer portion. So.
And my suggestion was that we don't put anything into writing in bylaws regarding a question that is in dispute right now. Okay, Mr. Swirsky, I think you and I can line up our notes if needed. And I'm going to say, seeing no more lights, turn this over to the Business Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to our Business Committee. Beginning with our financial reports, Mr. Hassler, is there anything specific in our financial reports that we would want to highlight, or members, other questions on 1A through G? Let's start with.
Nothing from 1A through 1G that I would give particular attention to.
Okay. Members, any questions on 1A through G? Okay. All right, moving on. Member Welty has a question.
Yeah. On page 5, the cash flow. Just a couple of quick questions about that. Just so I can, you've had a couple of months to take a look at this, and I'm sure I asked all these questions of Mr. Hansen at some point in the past, but I take a look at the first listing, cash and investments, January 31st, 2017, $144,593,000. And then I take a look at the bottom of that, which mentions the cash and investments for February 28th, 2017 at $142 million. What does that represent? Is that roughly 1 year's spending from January to January or from February to February? I don't think that is what it is, but explain to me what that would mean.
That is the actual cash balance on hand as of that date, January 31st. And if you look at the balance sheet on page 19, where it's all funds, on that first column on the left, you'll see 142,071. So that's the cash and investments that are available to meet our current obligations.
That's not liquid cash sitting around in a bank account, though, is it? Or is it involve what exactly does that mean?
It is cash sitting in a bank account, plus some short-term investments in CDs or other short-term instruments.
But it's not very liquid, is it? Or is it that liquid?
Yes, it is liquid.
Does it end up getting down to zero near the end of a fiscal year?
No.
Never.
Never.
We hope not.
Thank you. You had your next question, Member Welty?
Yeah, on the next, you've got, that's the total line. General fund line, there's an increase listed in January 31st, 2017 of $10 million, or is that a loss? That's an increase, $10 million. Does that represent money that the state has forwarded us for our just the running of the school district?
That $10 million represents how much was spent during the month for salaries, wages, all
expenditures. Okay.
All expenditures, yes.
Okay. And would be roughly the same for each of the following 11 months? Or does it vary a great deal depending upon things like
It will
TRA?
vary a great deal.
Okay.
This It depends on the month. If we have a large expenditure for bond payments or something like that, you'll see quite a bit higher number.
Okay.
And you could also have a month with 3 payrolls.
As opposed to 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to bids, RFPs, and quotes. There's a placeholder for network infrastructure. Is there an update on that?
I can address it. I don't have any documents to give you. Is the board aware of E-rate? It's a federal financing program for school technology, library technology. It's a program that allows us to take advantage of basically federal support to make technology purchases. You as a school district, all school districts, if they know what they're doing, have taken advantage of that through the years. So we have a bid out to replace some of our network infrastructure that is eligible for E-rate support, and E-rate has some very fixed timelines. We've actually done this bid in recent months, but the bids didn't come back basically in compliance with our process, so we were not able to come to you to make a recommendation to accept those. We went out to bid again, and the reason we did so is we're coming to the end of an E-rate application window. It'll come around again, but we have an opportunity to be in this current window, but we have to basically be in front of the board with the results of that bid process in this month. And so there is a board meeting coming up, and if we would wait until next month, we would be too late. Ideally, we'd like to have all these documents in front of you today so you could see them. We don't have them back yet, and that's because our initial round of the bid process, again, was not a good one in terms of the responses that we received. So in order to take advantage of this federal support, and we'll have much more complete information for you when it comes time to present a recommendation to you in the board meeting, so that you'll understand the value of doing an E-rate process. I'm hopeful that the board will find it to be something you can support. It does help us to replace some of the technology we have at the district without having to incur the full cost through our own funds.
Can you define what technologies we're going out for?
This is infrastructure, so we're probably talking Cisco switches. It's stuff that the user doesn't really interact with,
Yep.
but without that network architecture back there in a utility space, it doesn't work. Okay, you sit down to your computer and the network doesn't function. It's something that we have existing, but the technology that we have needs to be replaced from time to time, and this is a process that we would like to be able to upgrade what we have and do so with federal support while making those purchases.
Thank you. Member Welty.
I just want to confirm, when I read the line, due to the 28-day posting requirement for E-rate funding, the standard schedule cannot be met. I read that as we were too late, but we're not too late.
We're not too late, but it's too late for me to give you the document today, but we will certainly come before the board and the board meeting with complete documentation of the recommendation that we're asking you to accept.
Member Oswald.
Thank you. Have we used E-rate funding before for most of our purchases? So this is something that's pretty standard.
You've probably been using it for a decade or so. Maybe a little
haven't
longer.
seen it since I've been on the board,
Okay.
just so you know.
It's a good thing.
So-
This is a good thing.
Yep, I'm all in support of it. So I had read it just as Member Welty had too, that we're too late, and so what was going to happen? What we're going to do now? But I'm glad to hear there's hope. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to district-wide bricklayer labor services. Any updates on that?
We have Dave Spooner has all of the information you could ever want on this and other things. I would just like to summarize all these quotes that you see here, from bricklayer to flooring installation and running through the roofing, I believe, on the next page. These are all standard types of work that need to be done over the course of the year, and we go through this process to basically get locked-in pricing from the various contractors that would do this work, even when we are not currently contemplating any work next week, next month. And with your approval, these are then in place for
a one-year period with the option to extend 2 additional years by mutual agreement.
It allows us to act more quickly when projects come around, that we don't have to go through a lengthy bid process because we've already done that.
Okay.
Anything I left out there, Dave?
We've been doing this for approximately 15 years, 15, 16 years.
Looks like you've chosen, or that local folks have come up first, so that's great. Member Leffler Kemp.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So I recognize some of these that we've reviewed in the past, and are all of them bids that the businesses that we've used in the past for all of them? Or are there any new ones?
Every one that we have today is businesses that we've used in the past and are local.
Okay, local, and many are union, I know.
They all are.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Member Oswald.
I just want to make sure that these contracts aren't replacing district people at all.
No, Member Oswald, they're not replacing district people. They're for projects that are above and beyond the scope of what we can do in-house.
And so we have people that do all of these various things on our payroll and are booked solid, is what you're saying?
Correct. We have carpenters, for example, that do carpentry work every day, but I can't have carpenters take 2 weeks to build a wall at a concession stand in East High School, for example.
Understandable. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Good question. Member Welty?
Yeah, questions on 2 of these. On the quote on the annual service and maintenance of emergency generators, taking a look at page 51, where it talks about comparison of things. Normal working hours, after working normal hours, holiday working hours, those all show a decrease 10 to 20% in the hours. I presume that the contractors who are offering us the bids are going to be putting in. Is it not necessary then for them to spend as much money? Is this a way for us to save money? What does that represent?
Member Welty, this represents, we've had Cummins as a vendor for multiple years now, and I think they've learned over the years that they can do the work quicker, and they all try and be competitive they want the work, they want to be awarded, so they're bidding competitively, and they've determined that they can do the work for less cost than they've bid the work for or quoted the work for in the past. So we're just seeing a better number from that vendor. Do they get held to this if it turns out it does take more work than they were anticipating? Correct. It's an agreement. It's a contract with that vendor.
Okay. So they're just anticipating they'll be able to be more efficient themselves, but if they're not, tough luck.
Correct. They've learned over the past 9 or 12 years that they can do it better and faster, and they have more information to allow them to provide better numbers.
If I could seek some clarification on this, in each of these bid categories, was it common that we had multiple contractors bidding?
Correct.
Okay. So what you're seeing would be what I would consider the lowest responsible and responsive bidder?
Correct.
Does that make sense? These are the low bids, but they're also subject to
and they are quotes.
Being qualified.
Yeah, they're quotes, so we don't advertise. We send them out to local vendors that have shown interest, that have bid or quoted in the past, and we send them out to responsible contractors. Not all respond because some don't feel they can be competitive.
And so part of the motivation that a contractor might have in maybe coming forward this year with a slightly lower cost is they may not have they may have felt competitive pressure to do so, not knowing who might also be competing for that. So they want to sharpen their pencil and put in their best possible bid, or in this case, quote.
Thank you. Member Lefferkamp?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Spooner, for continuing to build positive relationships with these businesses, and so thank you.
Thank you.
Member Welty?
Just a quick question, Mr. Spooner. On the plumbing labor, 57, page 57, I note that the Jamar Company seems to be one that's been recommended. 43 years ago, I worked one summer doing some roofing for them, and I know they've made a lot of changes in their operations, but I remember them as a roofing company. They're into plumbing now as well?
Correct. They're diversified.
Project management company, correct? Okay.
They're
Lots of changes over 40 years.
They're
Member
slowly becoming a general contractor.
Member Johnston.
Just real quick question, Mr. Spooner. It's pretty clear, like on the Cummings, on the emergency generators, you got a price they're going to be doing.
Page
that.
Number, Member Welty, or Member Johnston?
Number 50.
Thank
page
you.
50. And that's pretty clear cut. And then if there's any additional work, you got the hours there. And that's so it looks like in this case they're probably guaranteed to have the 4,900, and then any additional stuff would be billed at that negotiated rate.
Correct. The 4943.96 is for required inspections by state fire marshal. If I got a call today that oil was leaking out of the generator at East High School, then they would be contracted at the normal working hourly rate.
Okay. Great. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Now compare that to, say, the first contract that the bricklayers labor on page, say, 36. Are they guaranteed an hour and so many hours on that, or are you basically just have you just negotiated or accepted the hourly rates and then whatever?
In order for us to be able to evaluate multiple vendors, we have to estimate hours. It's the proposal indicates that it's an estimated amount, and no hours are guaranteed, but this is a way to establish a way to compare different vendors.
Okay, so there's no amount guaranteed. If there's no work, you don't do any bricklaying, no tuck pointing going on, don't have to.
We don't pay any money if there's no work.
And if you do, that you got the rate. Okay, thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you. I think we made it through all of those quotes. We'll jump to, there are no policies and regulations. Contract 1A, design services. Mr. Hassler, I know you received that information this afternoon. If you want to just give us an update on that, that'd be great.
You should, you should all have the handout here with you today. This is information that that we've just been able to pull together from ARI. The improvements at Rockridge have taken a lot of time for us in terms of the planning and the design. And I'll tell you, Dave is raring to go, knowing that, in other words, to get that building ready for students to occupy it sometime later this year, you got to start, and you can't start until we get the phase 2 process where plans and specifications are developed. And so we have received a proposal from ARI to do that work for us, and we are recommending that the phase 2 work be authorized and approved so that ARI can move forward with the planning, the design, the development, and allow us to move forward with the actual improvement process.
This doesn't include the process for which we will fund this, correct?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Member Oswald?
With agreeing to this, also be authorizing us to remove this from a property listed for sale? I mean, if we approve this, are we voting to take Rockridge off off the market? Or is that a separate vote that we need to have?
Member Superintendent Lane.
I don't know that you have to vote to take it off the market, but using it for another purpose,
So, I mean, I just want to make sure that the public would understand that that's what we would be doing by approving this. Is that what we're essentially asking us to approve?
I would draw a small distinction between entering into a contract for an architectural firm to develop plans and designs for a project is something different than approving the project. It's approving work to prepare plans and specifications. It's not making a decision to award the actual improvement work to be done. I recognize it's a step along the way, but it's not the final decision that, by golly, improvements are going to happen on a given date. Now, Dave would like that beginning date to be as soon as possible, and I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but it was kind of.
It sounds picky. Oh.
Well, it's not the final decision. It is the final decision for work to be done at an expense that is specified, that we know is necessary if that building is going to be used for student occupancy with necessary improvements.
Are we planning on being asked to ever formally approve that further decision down the line once this is complete?
The actual improvements?
Or that we're moving forward implementing the plan? I mean, I just want to be clear with the public. I don't want to hide behind, oh, well, we did that by approving this and that. I mean, we just lay it out there, or no. I mean, I don't know. I understand what this leads to in the next step and that sort of thing, but I don't know that the public's going to understand that by us planning to use it differently that we're definitely going to or not. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speak for the board members, and I don't know that we've had that entire discussion in public yet. So I'm confused, and I don't know how much I can say in public too, because we've had these discussions in private. So I'm walking a tightrope. I'm going to just be quiet.
It's certainly a step along the path, and it's not the first step. The first step was actually to have ARI meet with our staff, meet with Woodland Hill staff, do some amount of the work that was preliminary to the point in time where you actually need to do the final designs and specifications, but it is certainly a step along that path.
Thank you. Member Johnston.
Sure, no, I understand what you're saying. I know we have to start somewhere. Luckily we haven't got a lot of feedback from anybody on that, but I was worried when we first started talking about this. The public are going to just get angry at us, that kind of stuff. That I haven't seen that yet, but I'm sometimes worried about we haven't really told them what we're doing yet. But just, I think we have to somehow do that. It seems to me we should be going through and spending $150,000 here. It seems to me that we're pretty much committed to this. And of course, there's other unknowns. What if the bids come in at they make the contract documents, and the bids come in at $3 million? Obviously, there is another step to go here, which we would have to reassess or revise the contract and all that kind of stuff. But again, that's just construction, so I don't have any problem with that. But it does seems like we're saying that we are going to go ahead and do this, and I don't really have any problem with it. It's just that I'm hoping that the people know what we're doing. One thing, in fact, don't ask me why I was looking, but I was looking today back at some of the old resolutions on the long-range facility plan, and there was some verbiage in there. I didn't look at them all real close, but this is before I came, that said, I thought some of them said that Rockridge would be sold by school board resolution. I'm just bringing that up, that there may be some nuances of, we can certainly change our mind. I'm not saying that's not possible, but it may be something we should check just to make sure that past resolutions and we're not being conflicting with past resolutions, and that could be easily done, I think. But just bringing that up. other issue is how did you select ARI? What was your selection process for this construction firm?
We, phase one, which I can't remember the date in which we hired ARI. It's been quite some time now that we've been working with them. I worked with Bill Hansen, and ARI was the only firm at the time that had capacity to take on this work because we knew that there'd be phase one, and if it proceeded beyond the schematic design of phase one, it would go to phase two of actually doing construction documents, plans, and specs. And we had talked to different firms, and there just wasn't interest at that time.
Okay, so you did make the selection, I know, and we often make selections in the federal sector based on quality, quality selection, not on bid, or not on price, so I'm
Professional
assuming
services statute
Right.
allows us to select based on quality is what you suggested, and we've worked closely with ARI on several recent projects. They did East High School for us, and we've been happy with their work. They were willing to take this on, and that's how we ended up with them.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any problem there, that's good. One other thing I did notice on here, on the first page, it does indicating that this is going to be in one phase. I know we were talking about in the past, maybe splitting up some of the costs, possibly to get some more LTFM money, or I think there was maybe that discussion, but now, we're going to, if the bid documents come in, everything is fine, we're going to go with the whole 9 yards, $2.5 million is going to be everything. We're not going to be phasing that. Am I reading that right?
And the thinking along the lines of that is that we now understand that we have a little bit of flexibility. One time we were looking upon it that we're going to need this building to be ready for occupancy in early September. We do have a little bit of flexibility that it does not have to be done by that time. And so it is a much more cost-effective project for us to go in and do it all than to do it up to a point and then stop and have a year of school and come back in the next succeeding summer and then go back and do what you didn't finish, and doing what you didn't finish may involve taking apart some of the things that you did once, and now you have to do them twice. So we now feel like we have the flexibility of timing that would allow us to do this the right way, which is to get in, get it all done, be out, and then have the building ready for occupancy. Not to say that there won't be times in the future that we may need to go into the building and do things. That's something that's true for any building that we would have. But it would not be necessary for us to go in and do major work in the next available time that the building is not occupied, maybe during the summertime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. No, and I agree with that too. It seems to make sense to me.
It is likely to be that the funding sources for that work may include some general fund component and LTFM component. We're hopeful that as much as possible will be LTFM compliant, because that relieves some of the burden from our general fund. But you can be doing that work at one time. It just requires an itemization of, okay, this work is getting paid for through this funding source. I'm not saying that's always going to be easy, but there will be at least two funding sources to do this work, and we'd like LTFM to be able to pick up as much of it as it can. But we also know, based on the work that needs to be done, that 100% of this work will not be LTFM compliant, because we're going to be putting in some spaces, we'll be putting in walls that don't exist today, because it makes that space more appropriate for the type of use that will occur. And LTFM is not about putting in new stuff. It's about replacing stuff that needs to be replaced because of wear and tear and no longer appropriate. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I think, yeah.
One thing I'd like to clarify is the fee that's proposed in ARI is approximately 2 to 3% less than a standard design bid build fee would be of 8 or 9%. This is 6%. And the reason why is listed in the criteria that I identified in the letter, and that's that we do it in one phase and that we do it with NJPA job order contracting, which is a different method of construction procurement, and it's similar to buying computers off a state contract. It's pre-established pricing for every type of task that you can think of that a contractor, whether it's a painter, a plumber, a carpenter, would do. It's still with local firms doing the work, but the pricing has already been established. So we can maybe reduce the time from design to construction by 8 to 10 weeks, because we're designing and we're creating plans and specifications that are to a level to allow the contractor to achieve a permit, instead of maybe a full set of plans and specs that they would need to do in a bid process, because the contractors are working with the architect right from the beginning of the projects instead of based on a bid set. So it's a little different method that we've been reviewing for a couple of years. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that process.
Thank you. We will, Member Johnston, you've asked a number of questions. We're going to give some more time for other board members, and we'll come back to you.
Sure.
Member Lefferkamp.
Yes, Mr. Spooner, you actually ended up answering a couple of the questions I had, but just to, I guess, reiterate, I wanted to check if this is a firm that we had worked with before, and I thought it had, and so thank you for clarifying that. And also, just that they have the capacity to do this work in the time frame that we wanted them to do it, and you clarified that, and I would agree to kind of move forward in one phase. Member Johnston, you asked about some of the neighbors, and being this is in my neighborhood, I certainly have been talking to a lot of folks about it and giving them information as I can. And I think one of the things that they've appreciated is that this would be moving the Woodland Hills education, the school, from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. And so that's helped them kind of understand it, as well as I appreciate, Mr. Spooner, you putting the project understanding on here about the repurposing of it. That is something the neighbors appreciated, as well as I've been talking to them. So thank you for adding that to this as well. Thank you.
Member Welty.
Mr. Spooner, we had, when we talked about this program to begin with, there was a concern about Woodland Hills, which would move into this building when it was ready. They were hoping to move in at the beginning of this year. I believe that the conversations that we've had have given them confidence to know that we are going to proceed, but maybe moving in by fall is not going to be in the cards. And as long as we proceed, and I think the first 155,000 that we're going to contract with ARA is a pretty good indication that we are proceeding with this essentially $2.5 million project. So I don't think Woodland Hills is concerned, but I'm curious about the timeline. You mentioned something about proceeding or maybe cutting 5 or 10 weeks off of the project. When do you think ARA will have the report in, and when would you guess Woodland Hills would be able to move into this? Are we talking about next year sometime or the following school year?
Member Welty, our initial thoughts are February 1st that we feel we could have it ready. That's initial thoughts, and we're only through schematic design, so that's a rough timeline. That is if we started now. Just want to clarify that.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're going through the process of the NJPA JOC.
National Joint Powers Agreement. It's state contract purchasing. It's a method of procuring construction that Carrie and I started looking at 2 years ago, and we haven't tried it. It's very popular east, west coast, down south, southern Minnesota. Brainerd did an addition and an elevator last year with it. It looks like it might be a good thing for us.
Great. Thank you. One question about the potential of adding a resolution just to officially take Rockridge off the market, to clear up the question that Member Oswald had. I know there's been a lot of press about this. It isn't necessarily a community surprise, but to make sure we button up all of those loose ends, is it a possible in board process in the coming week to have a resolution added to our agenda next week to officially remove Rockridge from the sale so that we can move forward and be clean?
I don't see the time, I don't think that's a problem from a timing standpoint.
Okay. And even just to, Member Oswald, I saw you put your light on.
I did. If a resolution already exists that it must be sold, I mean, we can just use that resolution to rescind that resolution, and that would be very clear.
I'm just making sure that, let's just have as many bows as we can to make sure that we're up and as forward with the public as we can be through the process. Thank you for adding that. Member Johnston, your continued question?
Yeah, you mentioned that. I wasn't familiar with that. Now I'm a little bit confused. It seems like by doing this, we're actually entering into not only the design phase, but we're also going into the construction phase, are we not, over what you said? Or am I, maybe I'm confused. Maybe say that again, because later on it talks about an owner-contractor contract, or owner-contractor contract, so that seems to be different from what you're saying, or I don't understand. So,
if we entered into this agreement at next week's board meeting, Architectural Resources, Gordian, EZIQC, which is the NJPA procurement company, and our local vendors would all meet, and they might spend 2 to 3 weeks putting together budget numbers and clarifying scope of the project, making sure things align with what we've already determined in schematic design. And then I'd come back to the board in the following month and indicate what this is going to cost, and that would give you the opportunity to say, if it came in at $3.5 million, you could say we're going to do it, but we were only going to spend $2 million, or you could say we're not going to do it at all, and we would have incurred however many hours of that $155,000 that they spent. It might be at $25,000, and we're done with it. Or they might come back and say, we can do exactly what you want for $2.5 million, and we proceed at that point. So we haven't, by approving this agreement next week, we're not committing to $2.5 million next week. We still have an opportunity to see what that will cost the following month, once they have some documentation and further review with the architect, with the contractors, and getting into the project more in depth.
could you encourage them to come up with a $2 million contract instead of 2.5?
We can encourage.
No, this just said somewhat in jest. But who is Gordian representative? I'm not familiar with what is that?
They're a national company, and they work with states. It's NJPA. We buy things off National Joint Powers Agreement in Minnesota on many different items. And procuring construction is a new method that I've recently learned about, and I've been to seminars on it over the past 2 years. And it's where construction is, every task in construction is broken down by either wiring might be lineal foot, or sheetrock might be square foot. It's all broken down into a cost catalog. So every item is already pre-established, and the state has already approved that cost. So when they bid they don't bid a project. When they price out a project, they look at the pre-established pricing that the state has already approved. So, for example, if they came across a change order 2 months into the project, the pricing is already there. It wouldn't be the same as if they had come across it prior to the project or after. There's no negotiation. It's already established pricing. It's a new concept. It might be something that maybe we all need to meet on at a separate time, that I could have them do a presentation. But it's intriguing, and I think it's fair for both the owner and the architect and the contractor. It takes away all the unknowns.
Well, no, it sounds good. I would be interested. Maybe I don't know if the whole board wants to. I'd be interested to learn more about it. Who's paying the Gordian representative?
They get paid on the NJPA contract. They get paid as a percentage. The job order catalog. Every task has an assigned price, and you have a general contractor, which could be Krauss Anderson down the road, for example, and they have to pay. The general contractor has to pay Gordian and NJPA whatever fees that they charge. So we pay one fee, it's known up front. We don't pay any extra fees to have them manage the project or provide a construction manager or site superintendent.
Thank you. Member Welty.
The NGAP contracts process, I was intrigued. You said something about change orders. I want to make sure I understood that. If there is a change order, they cannot charge for the change order, or there's a specified amount that they can charge for a change order?
They would go to their construction catalog, and the pricing is already established for if they miss something in the initial pricing. Typically today, if we had a project, if we had bid a project, it's always a negotiation for a change order. You never know if they're trying, contractors try and make a profit on a change order, but here there's no way for them to make additional profit because that price is already pre-established. They go to a catalog and they pull the price out. If they missed a drinking fountain, the amount that they can charge for a drinking fountain is in a task catalog. So it's already established. They can't charge you more than they should have initially.
Well, I can say that an old board colleague of mine, Member Bolich, would be delighted to hear about this process because he always hated change orders.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further lights, we appreciate the significant detail you gave on that and a new process, and it's really good that you're keeping us on track and moving us to new and more efficient processes. Also sounds like how we're trying to teach students how to learn, multidisciplinary, in groups, working together versus all different sets. So great job.
Thank you.
Next, the Lake Superior Swim Club contract. Any update, or is it in the same spot as last month?
I really wish that I had a great update for you. I really don't. That's still a back burner item that hopefully gets moved to the front burner very soon.
Okay, great, thank you. So that likely actually would be able to be listed on future items instead of placeholders? Because right?
Well,
now that it's been, now that we actually just discussed, okay, now that stays there, okay. I see nothing for other change orders unless, nope. All right, leases, acceptance of donations, release and pledge of collateral, that's the same that we had, same system we had last month, where they hit a certain threshold and then the percentage, and we're trying to release it. Okay, great. And then we have our adoption and considerations of investments. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and I mean like 5 minutes. So we'll see you back at 6:05.
We're so close. We're so close. Why are these people here? What's good? Are they all going to be saying, why did I come to this? Because we're not talking about that.
Oh, wait, I've got one.
Oh, where's it? Oh, are we going to be talking about this? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. I've got the color version. I got the color version.
It's taken me a couple of years to learn about this job order contracting, but I'm pretty kind of excited about it, actually.
Again, we are on item 5C, which I know we have a number of folks from our, Member Welty, you want to join us again, or you're welcome to come when you're ready. All right, so Superintendent, if you want to get started on the adoption and considerations of investments, we'll begin with a presentation from the administration and hold questions until the end of that presentation.
Yep.
Okay.
I think the few more folks are coming up to join us here. Well, thank you. I did give a handout that we're going to walk through. We'll start off with the planning parameters and things that we were keeping in mind as we went through this process. First off, in our vision and priorities, prioritizing that general fund spending to instruction and support of students, and our goal has always been 80% of general fund would be to instruction and support of students, so we tried to maintain that. Also, to maintain the investments that we made after the 2013 education levy, to maintain or lower class size, curriculum updates and strategies to support student achievement and to close the achievement gap. And so we seek to continue those investments with this plan and then work towards our world's best workforce goals, the 5 excellence areas. And then going to the next page, to support the strategies that we have been using in our district to get there, which is multi-tier systems of support, our professional learning communities, and improving school culture and climate. And then aligning, of course, with all of the other plans that we are required to have in the district, including the Reading Well by Grade 3, the Achievement and Integration Plan, and then I'd also add the Title Plan, on and on and on. Turning the page to the process that we've used in planning, we started with the Quality Steering Committee and met with the quality leadership teams as well, which is, I think there were probably 60 to 70 people there for that meeting. And we reviewed the revenues to expense projections, much like you've already seen those as well. And then identified budget priorities to what we believe to be the most effective strategies. So we talked about those things that we're doing that everyone believed were really moving the needle on getting us to where we want to be as a district. What are those things that are making a difference in student achievement and in closing the gap and increasing graduation rates? And because we want to keep those as priorities in the budget cycle. And we also brainstormed ways to increase revenue. We approached it as, what would it take to bring 10 more students to every school, and some of the strategies that we could use to do that. So we had some really good discussions through that process. We also brought the principals together and went through that same information and also identified those things that we believe are really our best practices. What do we want to hold as priorities in the budget process? And then we also went through the building budgets and their staffing grids to make sure things were coded appropriately on our staffing grids so that we are being clear about what the expenses and the how those were coded in the grids to make sure that it was appropriate. There's also that budget committee that meets throughout the year. During the budget process, we meet a lot more than usual. I would say probably for the past 2 months, we've met twice a week for probably 3 or 4 hours each time. And what we did is we brought in the leaders of each department and we went through budgets, line item by line item, to see if there was any easy fixes in there. We found a few just things that, we had that budgeted and that's from an old one-time investment and it's still in the budget, so we were able to make a few little reductions like that, not too many, but it really gave us an opportunity and department leads an opportunity to go through their budgets line by line so that we can all have a really good understanding of that. Having new people on staff was a really good thing to do again, to go through all of that so that we had a picture of all of the different department budgets. And then we started working on identifying items that we believe keep us on the track to achieving our goals and to highlight our current strategies. That doesn't mean that anything on this list is easy. The time of easy decisions on budget are long since gone. So all of these are difficult, and we do want to remind you that this is a draft. These are things that we still need to work through the details on. I can tell you before we get to the end of the story that we're not quite there yet. We have some more work to do, And some of these items will require some more planning too, but this is our initial draft at it. So this first page, we started with a projected revenue to expense looking at a deficit of 1.5 million. You remember we gave you a range as we've continued to work with legislators and we've watched the omnibus bills and we've updated our enrollment projections and continued to work on that. We felt that 1.5 million was an appropriate place to start. Now, if the legislature comes through and we have the governor's budget of 2% and 2% addition to each year, then that number will be lower. But right now, this is where we feel comfortable planning. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. There's new investments listed here for a total of $783,000, and I'm just going to kind of buzz through these. Staff development funds allocated to all buildings. This has been a discussion that we've had for a number of years, that there's been a desire to have some discretionary funding to use at the site level for staff development. So this would mean if there were teachers that wanted to go to specific trainings or specific conferences, that there would be some process at the building for deciding how they would use their staff development funds. There's already some language around that about having a staff development committee at the building level to make those decisions, but there hasn't been funding. So this would allow funding for that, and that number was built with a consideration of $100 per teacher. So then it would be allocated to buildings by the number of teachers in that building. Staff development for special education teachers of $25,000. That was specific to some climate and some reading and math training specifically for special education staff. We talked about an ATSIS grant. Was that last month? We talked about that grant application and how it would be, if we are successful, and we are hopeful that we will be successful, that there would be some investment that we would need to make for that grant. And this is probably a little higher than what the actual would be, but we wanted to make sure that we had an appropriate allocation there. ELL restructure, as we had a visit this year, we need to be providing services at all of our buildings where there are ELL students rather than having a focused site, and so we need to make some more investments to be able to do that. Technology. This is an additional investment in technology, recognizing that our technology is becoming outdated and fading on us more rapidly than we are able to buy it and invest in it. So that makes an additional investment of $300,000 a year towards our technology goals. The next line, equity investment for $150,000. We're not exactly sure what this looks like at this moment, but as we are working with the community and the staff at Dunfeld and at Lincoln, we want to be able to have some funds that are specific to doing something different at those sites. And so that could be part of the technology budget, it could be part of this, but we wanted to make sure that there was additional funding available specific to that. Climate coordinator, this was one of the reductions that we made last year. We went from a full-time to a half-time and recognized that this was really a key position for us, not only in addressing policies and some procedures and staff trainings, but also the specific work that was being done with families, especially on restorative practices. And today's crisis was a really good example of the key work that this position has led in leading crisis conversations and crisis teams. We just really feel that it's important that someone come to work every day with this in mind, and that their availability to address any crisis when it happens, and to be the team leader on that is really a valuable position, and I think the assistant superintendent would like to speak to that.
I just
as
wanted
well.
to add staff development too, that being able to oversee the needs that we have regarding our third strategy of providing a safe, welcoming, positive school climate, we need to be a little more intentional there, I think.
Thank you. The next piece is in response to a lot of the conversations that we've had. One is to provide something to recognize the service that our lunch monitors at the elementary level have. There's conversations about raises in the past, and some of our cafeteria staff who work in the kitchen, it's an allowable expense under the federal program for them to receive a meal as part of their employment. It was a few years ago, it was discontinued that lunch monitors could be included in that. So we have some staff in the kitchen who are able to have a meal as part of their employment, and other people who work in the kitchen who aren't allowed, and it's a way to recognize their value, but also they can be very difficult positions to fill because they are less than 12 hours a week positions, and so this may make those positions more attractive and perhaps a little easier to fill. So we have that as a consideration for you as well. So that adding the investments to the deficit, we have $2,283,000 in adjustments to identify. And Doug, I'll have you jump into the next page and start walking us through some of that. We're going to be trading off as we go to talk about different departments and different areas. And Doug is going to take us through these first several pieces.
Given the budget reduction target that we have, that 2.2, almost $2.3 million number, that's a pretty big number. As the superintendent, I think, addressed, it'd be a great thing if we could go through this process and just make budget reductions that have very little impact on people and won't be missed. We've maybe found a few of those, but the bulk of these are real cuts, real impacts on, in many cases, the staff that we currently employ. And we recognize that, and we also want to make clear that we respect and value all the work of our employees, and understand that the I wouldn't call it a recommendation tonight because we're not putting this out to be approved, but as we move through this process, to the extent that staff positions are going to be impacted by this, it's a necessity given the dollars we're dealing with and the reality that our budgets are very heavily weighted towards staff and staff costs. That's the model of education that we work in. So without further ado, going down from the top of that document, we've identified a budget adjustment within the Human Resources Department involving technology equipment budget, and that's a relatively small reduction, and that's one of those reductions that was an obvious one as we were looking at our recent expenditure history and the reality that we could make a reduction there without really impacting our current level of service. The second item is something that I think we're going to find great value in. The software that we use for employees to report absences has some limitations, shall we say, and we are aware of another software. It's actually a software that my prior school district actually did use. It's called ASOP software. It allows for staff absences to be reported. It allows for substitutes to be aligned with that, and it is also something that is a more affordable system for us to employ. So that's an opportunity that we think we have to actually not just maintain, but perhaps even improve the capabilities of our software while doing so with a less expensive system.
And save some staff time in the process, too.
That's right. We also have a voluntary one-time reduction affecting the Director of Assessment, and you see there the cost savings that relates to that. Going beyond that one, you'll find in the next one is the first of a number. There are a number of areas where we have identified staff reduction without actually identifying the position. I point that out for a couple reasons. For one thing, we'd like to avoid people seeing that and understanding, oh, that's my position they're talking about tonight. And also that we're still in, I wouldn't say we're at the beginning of the process. We've been at this for quite some time, but we're far enough along, but we're not too far yet, and we're still open to finding ways to make these things happen in a flexible process. And certainly we want as much input as we can get. We've already had input from various administrators around the district, and that will continue. So we will refine some of these things to come to a more detailed understanding of what positions will be impacted. So the next reduction that you'll see there is one affecting the Business Services Department, and that is a staff reduction proposed for $50,000. The next one, and unfortunately we don't have enough of these, the next one is a savings that is existing. We've recently gone through a process to enter into a new lease for the copier equipment that we have in our print shop, and while doing that with newer systems, replacing the systems that we had in place that needed to be replaced, we're actually realizing a cost reduction in our lease costs. So that's a fairly painless impact on our budget, which also creates the opportunity for us to have new, updated, high-quality equipment. Within the facilities department, we have another opportunity where Mr. Spooner's predecessor and the line item of expense relating to his predecessor was kind of baked into our budget as we came into this year. So our budget does not yet truly reflect the actual cost of our existing staff positions within the facilities department. So that is a cost reduction that we will be able to make, again, without impacting anybody on our existing staff. The next one is one having to do with a proposed reduction that would affect some of the folks in our trades area within the facilities department. We're still working through the details of how that would work, but we do think there's opportunity for us to realize savings of up to $111,000. Within the facilities department, with our classified substitute budget, we are projecting some opportunity for cost savings of $30,000. We had a significant backlog of open positions that really required that we employ more substitutes during that period of time that positions were open. We've now kind of stabilized and reached a point where that backlog is much smaller than what it used to be. So going forward, we do not anticipate to have the same level of substitute expense for those positions. So that's an opportunity for us to scale back what our budget calls for that need. Moving over to the transportation department, the fuel budget within our transportation program, based on the detail of information we're looking at in recent history, we believe that we can make a reduction there of $40,000 for the fuel for our bus fleet. This is something that I can tell you that even when you see an opportunity for this, you do want to be somewhat hesitant. You don't want to be too aggressive on something like this because the cost of fuel is something we do not control. We have had a fairly good run of time where fuel costs have come down in recent years. It's hard to get the crystal ball out and say that what we are experiencing now will now continue forever. Obviously it won't. But we do have confidence that we can make a reduction there, which will still allow us to secure the fuel that we need to operate our fleet, and that's something we'll have to keep an eye on as we move into future years. Also, within the transportation department, we believe that there is opportunity for staff reduction through a combination of duties, and to realize a savings of about $80,000. And before we leave the transportation department, there's one more opportunity that exists. We do a fair amount of transportation for our career and technical education students. We have students from East that participate in a program at Denfeld, and so we need to transport them from East to Denfeld for that program. We have a number of students from Denfeld who participate in a program that we provide at East in the CTE area. And so this is not a change in terms of the transportation we're doing. We've been doing this in the past. We're going to continue doing it in the future. But if we code it differently, if we code it against a CTE-related expense, that will generate some additional revenue for us. So this is a good opportunity where we don't have to do anything different in terms of the buses that are transporting our kids, the services that they need and are going to be getting. That will all be entirely seamless. What will be different is the coding that goes on behind the scenes as to what budget account that goes against. It's still going to be a general fund budget account, but it will be in a budget account that will generate some additional revenue for us. And at this point in time, I think I'm ready to hand off the baton to Amy Starzecki.
I'll just make a quick comment about the next line item, reduction in homebound budget. Last year we had staffed a full-time FTE to support that homebound budget. This year we have used some temporary staff, some subs, and based on what that has looked like over this year, we can make a reduction. So looking at our allocation for this year, comparing that to what we've actually seen in need, we believe that we can make a reduction of $25,000 there to support our homebound needs. Want to be careful there. Again, that is unpredictable, and so we want to make sure that we've got wiggle room in there because you can't really predict those needs. But we think $25,000 reduction is appropriate.
I'm going to jump in just for one item and hand it back to Amy. The next item is also one that is very much still in a process of reviewing, and that is the clerical support here at Hawks. To be clear, the clerical staff here really keeps us running and keeps us going, and we value their work very much. And as we all keep saying, it's not easy to look at this, but we are going to review our programs and our departments, review the number of weeks or the number of hours each week that staff is here to make sure that we are covering the departments that we need to cover and do the work that we need to do, but look at tightening that up and maybe having some crossover of duties there as well. And that is something that all the department leaders will be working on together. We've already started some of those conversations and will continue, and in the coming weeks firm up what those recommendations would be. I'll hand it back to Amy.
Okay. Dr. Carey can't be here tonight. He had a prior obligation, so I'll just briefly talk through some of the reduction ideas regarding the curriculum and instruction department. The first line item is our innovation department. The line item there is to discontinue our innovation position and the budget that is connected to that. Second item is immersion specialist reduction, going from a 0.8 to a 0.6. This is actually what we're currently staffed at, and so our recommendation is we continue that. That reduction was made kind of late after the budget had already been allocated. this past year. So this is more of an actual as to what we're currently doing in regards to the emergent specialist. Next line item is a reduction in True North AmeriCorps. We currently house True North AmeriCorps workers in our elementary schools to support reading and math interventions. We've had pockets of success with True North. We've also had some other outside entities help to support that grant. We are not necessarily getting that same dollar amount back that we've had in the past to support that grant. And so in order to maintain our commitment to that, we would need to actually increase our allocation for True North. And so given the pockets of success as well as the application for our ADSYS grant, we've made the recommendation to discontinue investing in the True North interventionist. The next two line items have to do with reorganization and how we deliver staff development and support for curriculum and instruction. And so this is very, we still have much work to do as to what this will look like, and working with Dr. Carey and principals as to what is the support that we need to make sure that our curriculum is aligned to standards, that we have our pacing guides, but also what does the staff development budget need to look like in order to do the work that we need to do to support good teaching and learning. The substitute budget reduction there is specific to grade level and content meetings. We want to look at a new format for how we deliver staff development that would be less of a cost. So what you see there is the cost reduction in the cost for subs to be able to implement grade level and content meetings. Not all of them, just a reduction. And that's all for mine.
The Special Services Department reduction of $48,000 is, in my opinion, a conservative estimate. As the superintendent said earlier, the greatest factor for staffing implications has to do with student enrollment. And obviously, as students come and go, student choice is a factor for Duluth schools. We tend to see a student uptick throughout the school year, and then at the end, we need to be fiscally responsible as students graduate out or student choice is identified. We adjust our staffing ratios depending upon how many students will be in the buildings in the fall. So that's what that line item is a recommendation for.
Mm-hmm. In the final section affecting district-wide, we believe that we will be in a position to make an administrative reduction in the amount of $60,000. More significantly, on the next line, we believe that there is an opportunity for cost reduction just through the normal process of attrition with with retiring staff, and then hiring in new staff at a lower cost. So strike attrition from that statement. And we don't yet have a complete handle on all of what all of our retirements will be this year. The greater number of positions, the greater opportunity that exists for savings, and yet so we're projecting $700,000 there. And finally, we're looking at an increased chargeback to community education, covering district-wide costs of service in the amount of $50,000.
I do want to go back to the reduced costs on the difference between retiring staff and average new hire cost. Doug did some great work with some scatter plots and finding what the average new hire cost for the district has been in the past, and so I applaud that work, and we'll continue to look at those numbers. So the next page is just a summary of that the deficit number that we started with, the new investments for the total of $2,283,000. The draft adjustments that we've just gone through total $2,006,262, which means there's still another $276,738 for us to continue to work on and to find. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we'll continue to watch the legislative session and watch enrollments and continue this work. The next steps would be for you as a board to have some discussion about this, and we'll be looking for some direction. We do have a tentative meeting scheduled for Wednesday, where if you were telling us that some things need to look different here and you want to see it again before Tuesday, we would meet on Wednesday. If you're comfortable with where we are with this and don't feel that you would need a meeting, then we wouldn't hold that meeting. So we'll be looking for some direction on that tonight. And then we'll be meeting with the principals some more to talk about this, be working through this. We'll be working with our staffing allocations and continue to work on this until it's finalized in June.
Thank you, Superintendent and Administration, for a lot of work that you've done. And this is the second year in a row now that you've had this be a group presentation, and I think that that's really helpful. So just as board members, I think we can be really helpful to our staff and all that have been involved. I know even folks that are sitting in the room have all been sitting at the table. So thank you. And I know this isn't an easy process. This budget numbers also mean people. And so let's continue with that air of humility and just respect for the process for the staff members. And so appreciate that, and and echo what our staff has said. The process for questioning that we'll go through for this time is that we'll do one question per board member going around the table at the time when, if are my colleagues fine with that, just to make sure? Looking for, seeing nods. Art, are you in agreement of that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Alana, are you okay with that process? Okay. Okay. Just making sure. So what we'll do is we'll go around one person. If at the time you don't have a question, you can pass, and we'll continue going around until everybody's had a chance. But we just want to make sure that this is as easy as possible. All right. So with that, we will start. Member Johnston, your light is on first, so we'll start with Member Johnston, then we'll start heading this way. So your first question, and then let's also just continue with that respectful tone as our board. So thank you, Member Johnston. We'll get you start. You can start with a brief first question.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes there may be comments, not just questions.
So then we'll let it be a comment, and then the next person will go.
Sure.
So comment or question, and then next.
Okay, the first question I've got would be on first page, budget planning to date, projected revenues to expenses, 1.5 million. And when we had our previous budget meeting, the big unknown we had was teacher negotiations and likely increases on teacher expenses due to likely increases, and we typically have 2% increases. So I'm assuming this does not include that. Don't we have to eventually start putting that number in sometime? And that, if I recall, it was about 1.2 million, somewhere in that. So I was wondering, how are you dealing with that? That's a big chunk.
Good question, Member Johnston. We'll let administration answer.
Thank you. We actually did include a number in here. We kind of went middle of the road and said we would figure for a 1% in this number. If negotiations were 2%, then we would need to increase this number. We felt with the legislature leaning towards a higher number than they're currently looking at, and not knowing where that was, we felt comfortable with the 1.5 number for this year.
Thank you. Member Oswald, your question or comment?
I'm sad to see the number of things that I've highlighted that relate to people, and under that I'm not going to name. I'm not asking about who or what or anything, but I know I have heard it mentioned before about not using True North AmeriCorps anymore. As a former AmeriCorps Vista, I'm sad. But my question it more relates to, I know we just voted on the American Indian non-concurrence form that included continuing using math interventionists and reading specialists that are True North AmeriCorps. So do we have to adjust our response to that previous document, or is this just moving forward, or is this eliminating them all? I guess those are all, sorry if those are too many questions.
Superintendent.
No, it needs some clarification. Reading Corps and Math Corps would continue. True North AmeriCorps is separate. So we would still have that reading and math piece.
Thank you. Member Leffler-Kemp, a question or comment?
Thank you for clarifying that. I think I just want to make a comment. Again, I also just want to thank all of you for the time you put into this and the thought and the presentation. Just on the first kind of page on budget planning to date, I guess I just wanted to say I appreciated seeing the staff development funds and that desire to do it more at the school-based level, and also appreciated on this page the thinking in terms of the climate coordinator being more fully funded. I have more specific questions on some of the other pages, but I'll guess I need to just kind of work down is how I think. So, sorry.
Thanks. Thank you, Member Leffler-Kemp. Member Welty, question or comment?
Thank you. I'm going to make an observation, and then I would appreciate just some background information on it. I guess the thing that troubles me the most is taking a look at what's happening to curriculum and instruction. There's about $500,000 being taken out of curriculum and instruction. And this has been my sense of that particular department, that when I first came here, it was in the first phases of recovery after a number of years of extreme penury and hardship. And under Dr. Carey, we've had a real resurgence. In fact, one of the things that was of great concern was that we just simply were not doing the alignment work, and we had the state come down heavy on us, and we were fortunate they gave us a bunch of money to try to help with that alignment work. But as
They didn't give us money.
Well,
We invested that.
well, yeah, the investment. Okay, so, but $500,000 is an awful lot. What does this hint at the future for our curriculum work? How will alignment and how other things be affected? I mean, I realize we're doing this to save teaching staff, and I understand that, but what will this mean for the curriculum department?
Thank you. Superintendent or assistant superintendent?
And that is work that we are continuing to do. We don't have all of the answers. It's really some target numbers that we have there. I do want to recognize that some of the money is being redirected or reinvested towards staff development in other ways. On that front page with the allocation to buildings for staff development and the special education, the ADSIS is some of that intervention work and support for that. And so some of those investments are kind of going back into curriculum and staff development work that would be coming out there. Part of this is when we restructured, we did make some additional investments in the department, specifically to get caught up with the intent of backing off on some of that so that we could continue to redirect the funds. When we started the grade level meetings specifically was to really quickly update staff on all of those curriculum changes that were happening all at once, and to have a way to bring people together, share all that data, and then for them to go back out to the buildings. And now is an opportunity to restructure that, now that we're pretty caught up on that, although it's a continuous effort. It's how do we do that in a more cyclical fashion so that it's just ongoing cycling work, and talking about maybe some areas have more staffing and then the next year another area has staffing, so maybe more of a revolving model. But like I said, those are things that we're continuing to work with. We'll be working with the principals and with Dr. Carey is very involved with this, obviously. So we're hopeful to find a model that still provides us with the work that we have to do and the support staff needs, but in a new model.
Can I add to that?
Assistant Superintendent.
No, I lost my thought. Sorry. The comment about mapping and making sure we're addressing standards, that's part of the priority. And so there are some things that are kind of non-negotiable that we have to continue doing. So if we did look at how that staffing looked different, that would be part of that prioritizing how we do that work.
Thank you. My question has to do with the potential investment of $300,000 for technology, but then but then eliminating the innovation coordinator. And I know that as we look at integrating more technology into our schools, I just wonder who will that fall on, because I heard what gets monitored gets done, and so that it's a really hard. I know everything's hard, but I just how do we continue to stay on the forefront as a district? That's a question there.
Thank you. I would love to get to the place where we perhaps had a one-to-one initiative. This $300,000 does not really get us to the point where we're investing a ton. This is more to build up over time to be able to do something like that. I could also see future conversations, if we were talking about a levy, to have a technology levy, and if we were able to get to that point, then that additional staff of innovation and field tech support would be part of that initial investment. Right now, we don't have enough funds to get us to the point where the majority of our system is ready for that. And so our thought would be that could possibly be a way that we focus attention on specific sites, perhaps as part of an equity plan. Maybe technology is one of the things that we put out there as something different at specific sites until we got to the point that we could support that more fully as a whole district, if that answers the question.
Thank you. Chair Kirby, any questions?
Thank you. I'm glad to see that there's not very much reduction in the special ed department, but given that the governor's budget doesn't call for much of an increase in that, and it may not make it through, and the recent Supreme Court case which says that you have to provide, for some districts, maybe not ours, more than has been in the past, and the fact we don't have any control over what we pay for Edison's special ed, is this likely to go up, or is this a realistic number here?
Well, as I earlier said, the number one factor for special ed staffing has to do with our student enrollment, and it does ebb and flow. We have several school sites where we have projections because they don't have the next grade level at some private schools, for example, or charter schools. We have them on our student rolls right now. I hope every one of those families and students come to our district. As I said, this is a conservative estimate. If we get them all, we won't have a reduction because we'll need to have more staff. Historically, we've had to make some reductions come the spring.
Thank you. Member Johnston, a comment or question?
Sure, thank you. I'll flip back to the last page on the reduced costs and difference between retiring staff and average new hire cost. That's a big one, the $700,000. This is something that I've always thought we should be seeing, But in the past, we've always kind of went the other way and saying that because lane changes are going up, everybody's getting a little bit higher lane, therefore the costs are going to go up. And in the past, we've always actually put a cost on that in addition to the 1 or 2% salary increase. We've always looked at it, that lane change cost. Now, this is kind of going the other way. I mean, I've always thought this is be what it should when we have retirement. We obviously have people coming in at a lower salary, which is what I think this is. But it is quite a change from what we've done in the past. So I'm just wondering if you could, that's a big ticket, and I'm not hoping you're right, because when we get newer staff, they're less experienced and all that, but nonetheless, it is a cost savings. I'm just wondering why the big change over what we speculated in the past.
I can't speak with full information on what's been done in the past. I can speak to, the document that I've shared with you previously, and the document I'm holding in front of you has been modified a little bit because new information comes available, and you'll be seeing this at a future time. That document did anticipate an increased cost for step increases. Lane changes are hard to predict. Over time, maybe we can develop a baseline of expectation for that. But so I guess what I'm saying is that $1.5 million revenue to expenditure difference already accounted for additional costs of staff. And so in terms of budget reduction, just separating out the effect of lane change or the step increases that's already been accounted for, now we're separately showing what we think recent history tells us we ought to be able to generate from staff retiring and being replaced by less experienced, less expensive staff. Both things are going on, they're just accounted for different places.
Okay,
so I didn't wave my hand and make the step increases and the lane changes go away. That's already been accounted for as best we can do. And so this is just the flip side of the coin of cost savings opportunity as retiring staff leave us and are replaced.
Okay. It is kind of it's another one we hope is going to happen. It's not a for sure thing, as some of these are, and I'm hoping you're correct on that. But one that does bring up, if we've got quite a bit of difference, could you update that sheet that we had here a month or two ago when we got that? And I don't know if it's worth updating, but we've went down quite a bit to the 1.5 million over whatever we had. Might be good to update that.
Sure.
Too, so we know, okay, hey, what were the changes in the assumptions?
Thank you. Member Oswald.
I just have an overall question in that, are we voting on this on the next week? And so the question I have is that I'm nervous to vote on this knowing that you guys aren't even sure how all of this is going to happen yet. I'm not ready to say yes. I don't see anything that I majorly disagree with. It's just a sad document overall. It makes me very depressed. But it's, I'm not, upset about a lot of it. Depending on what those changes are. And I would really like to, I really expect more detail in what, because reorganizing an entire curriculum department, I would much rather know, who the players are in there, what services we're cutting or not, and be a lot more firm about that.
Member Oswald, can I interject with a board, please, history understanding of that, if that's okay? Mm-hmm. That usually we actually see considerations a couple of months earlier, and so we approve the considerations each month as they go, and we keep hearing. So it's not like not like voting this budget in. We say XYZ position is like that. We vote it with the understanding that we continue to discuss and move forward with these adoptions and considerations. It's our working understanding and validation that we're supporting the administration's direction, and the final budget that we vote on in June is that final stamp. And so to me, this is our public declaration that we're supporting and all the work that administration staff are doing, and that they're also listening to our feedback. So this is a dialogue piece.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification, being this is only my second time around.
I honor that, and I didn't really get it until my third year.
If you could allow me to revise my comments then.
Yeah, okay.
In future budgets, I would really like to know what the heck's going on. Does that make sense? Thank you.
If I could.
Superintendent.
It's a delicate dance because we have some ideas in mind, and we want to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. But if we start having identifying, this is what we're thinking right now, and then it gets very specific, and perhaps we have that very specific conversation, and then the answer is, well, no, we're going in another direction. And then we have to make other very specific. And so it's just very difficult time for staff. So we start off with kind of a general direction and then get more specific. And as we get more specific, we start having conversations with staff before that gets to that.
I hope you're going to appreciate my anxiety over I got to vote on this for next week, thinking it's all cut and dry. And I understand better now. So it changes my perspective. Still very sad.
I was just going to add to what you're saying. It's like we need your direction for us to move forward, but yet we can't move forward without some direction from you. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg a little bit.
Incubating the egg. We're sitting on the egg, right? Like working on it. But it's a good question, and I think we're all reverberating the feels. Member Leffler-Kemp.
The egg analogy, so close to Easter for those of us who celebrate Easter, is kind of weird. But anyways, I again want to stress I appreciated that you laid out the planning process, and as we're having discussions as board members in the community, I hope that we all share with folks just the planning process and how many staff across the district it has already involved, and our first look at some of the numbers a couple months ago as well as the process started. So I think that's a helpful thing for us to be helping to educate the public on how the budget process works. But I had a question about the teaching and retiring staff and average new hire cost. And is that number similar to a projection we had what was the projection last year for that number? I didn't pull up this sheet from last year tonight, but I'm just curious if it was.
I'm not sure we had a number included on that.
I thought we did, so okay. I was just curious on that. And then
thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Member Welty.
Yes, I have a question on that same subject. Little history. I'm going to make a little statement again, and I'd like some feedback. If you can deduce a question from it. When I was on the school board in the old days that everybody rolls their eyes about, it was just taken for granted that when senior staff retired to be replaced by younger staff, there would be a savings. And I don't know that we always figured out exactly what those savings or the changes in the coming year were going to be. But in relation to whether this was figured into the last year's budget, my recollection was being very surprised when I rejoined the school board that there was a general sense from the administration that new hires there was no savings when you retired senior staff at the upper end of the pay scale and had them replaced. Now, we've been told, the figure that I use in my head when I talk about costs for a staff person, that the average cost of a staff person with salary and benefits is $90,000. I have to say that if we did not calculate that there would be a reduction in cost last year, it does make me wonder if there was a few $100,000 or anywhere close to $700,000 in changes, where that money, where that savings ended up being spent last year, because I presume the same thing took place. So, Mr. Hassler, I guess what I'm asking is, could you give me just a little preview or just a little explanation of how you analyzed our staffing needs and came to the conclusion that we might have $700,000 in lesser costs because of new staff at a lower cost replacing these senior expensive staff?
What I've looked at is simply if we have 10 retiring staff and are replaced by 10 new teachers with different assumptions on what a retiring staff member is making and what a younger staff member is making, identifying what that savings is. Now, our history has been that we've had something closer to 30 or perhaps even more retirees. So my assumptions are based on something closer to 30. It's not an evaluation of where each and every one of those staff people are teaching today to know what classroom teacher or subject matter teacher is going to need to be replaced. It's just looking at the overall numbers and looking at our senior staff. You just look at where people are on our salary schedule, and those that are retirement age, without even knowing the names, it's pretty easy to figure out where they are. They're at the high end, usually on the master's degree scale, maybe over a column or two. And so I've just looked at what the average salary expense is for somebody of that years of service, that length of tenure, and captured that, made an assumption for that, and then based on the absolute the only thing that I truly know is what is the contract salary for our new hires this year for every staff member that came to us this year as their first year teaching with us. Many of them have taught somewhere else and brought some experience with them. So I know what that expense was last year, and I can't guarantee you that was a typical year in terms of our new hires. But if our experience in the teachers that we hire for our next school year is at least no greater experience and no greater level of educational attainment than what they were last year, we'll get savings there for each and every one of those positions that we replace. If we would be in a position to have new hires that may not have as many years of experience as the group that we hired this year, the savings could be greater than what I'm assuming. But right now, I think a fair number to use is the number we're using today, the $700,000. I can come up with numbers that are higher than that, but I have to make a lot of assumptions to accomplish that. And I think with the exercise that we're engaged in, you need to make some assumptions, but you don't want to overdo it, especially because if the whole process is based on you actually achieving what you're representing, I don't want to go too far out on that limb.
Chair Harlan, could I just ask if he thinks this is a conservative? I think you just said that, but is this fairly conservative?
Did I actually say the word conservative? I started to, but I held back from it. But there is that sentiment. I mean, it's if you wanted to be conservative, I'd say we're going to have 10 retirees, and I'm assuming more than that. And the good news is you can get a fairly big number. As we look at the numbers on this page, that 700,000 is pretty grabs your attention because it's a pretty big number in savings potential in one box. Now it's lots of people that are involved in that number. So it's somewhat conservative, but it's also got some assumptions. If I am wrong about our number of retirees and we don't get 30, we get 22, we're probably not going to get to 700. We'll still get a pretty good number, but and if it's 45,
that assumption also hires back the same number of teachers.
Yep.
So if we were hiring fewer teachers, that savings would be greater. I also wanted to add that for a good many of the years between your first your first experience on the school board and the second, there were many, many layoffs. And we got to the point that we were laying off teachers that had 15 plus years experience and a master's degree. And so when they were called back, when we did have openings, there wasn't that savings because they were coming back to their same place on the scale. And so over time, we've gotten to a place where that new teacher orientation and with teacher shortages nationwide, that cohort of teachers that is coming in is being younger and younger.
Thank you. Good question. I'm wondering about the True North line item and if we've been in conversation with the YMCA and with that relationship, are they willing to look for additional funding to continue their end, or? I guess
we have had conversations with them. It started last fall when we were working with the grant, suggesting that we may be headed in another direction. We were considering ADSIS at that time. We have had continuing conversations with them, so it won't be a complete surprise. Individual buildings will still have the capability to use their discretionary funds if they would like to continue. Some of our schools have had additional members and they may decide to continue, but that will be, the CITs will make that decision with principals on how to use those funds. They had also had conversations with some other school districts who have always had an interest and maybe would be taking on a few, so they have some options for them as well. A big part was we had other organizations helping us to pay the matching on that, and so not only would we have to continue at the 70, but we would have to make we'd probably almost be doubling what we'd be paying. So,
thank you very much. Chair Kirby?
Thank you. I think that continuing on with this process is what you should do. I don't have any great changes I would suggest. I assume that you're going to have continued input of the principals and the QSC during this, and they're not out of this process by now. That would be good. The other thing I would suggest to everyone here that's been mentioned earlier today and before is that we write the governor and the leader of the House and the Senate and tell them that we need the governor's budget, that it has tremendous implications for our own budget, and that needs to be said to everybody, and that's something we all can do. So that would be my comment.
Thank you. Member Johnston.
Already. Okay, thank you, Chair. Last year we had a big take-cut of contingency funds, which we don't this year. And I was just wondering, last year, if I recall right, it was $700,000-800,000. That was somewhere, it wasn't in our budget reduction, but it was part of our budget. And now we don't have this year. I don't recall if Mr. Hassler put it on his initial sheet or not, but where did that go?
It was on the considerations list last year because we were reducing the amount held in contingency, so that's why it was on the considerations list. We would still have a contingency built into the budget to address things that happen during the year that we don't plan for. So that would still be in the budget.
Thank you. Member oswald.
I pass.
Okay. Member Leflerkamp.
Let's see, I have two questions, but I'll ask one first. I was just curious with the reduction in the homebound budget. You mentioned that this year a lot of subs were used, and in your thinking for it next year, would it still be sub-based, or would you have more consistency for the program?
Good question. We actually have had some part-time folks who have staffed that position. The subs come in when the demand is higher. So we're able to, instead of staffing a full-time position and that person has some downtime when there's not the need, this allows us to staff the position. If the need goes up, then we're able to incorporate more staffing. So we do have some go-to people. We only tap into those sub costs if they've exceeded their caseload and we need more folks.
Thank you. Member Welty.
We had a comment about special education costs and what we might expect if we had students re-enroll in our district from other districts who are special ed students. And I think we were left with the sense that if special education students came into our district from other districts, that would benefit our finances. I guess I'd be interested in getting a little bit of feedback on that. I assume that special education students cost more money because they get special education funding. So my first thought would be that if we got special education costs, there might be a possibility they might cost us even more, or we might be able to decline giving them special education services, which might be if there was some debate about whether they should have been getting the special education costs at another school, maybe it would be something that we could have mediated. But I'm wondering if there is a possibility that if we got a number of special education students, we might actually find ourselves spending more than we actually would if we didn't get them back because of the extra costs they incur.
Did he sneak in multiple questions? I can't keep track. Well, one of the first places to start is special education students are general education students first. So I highlighted the superintendent's efforts to recruit students. It benefits the districts when you have high student enrollment at whatever site. And the special ed department responds to staffing allocations depending upon student enrollment. And I'm speaking in glittering generalities, but we're talking about teachers, we're talking about special ed paras, we're talking about specialized programs, and we're talking about related service personnel. So the staffing ratios on all of those factors depend upon your student enrollment, and at times they ebb and flow up and down. Does that make sense about how we...
The beginning, the preface.
Yeah. So anything else to add?
I will say that students who are coming to Duluth from outside of our district, they are directly billed to the district that is sending them. So those costs are covered by their home districts.
So it would be the case with charters.
And
correct.
Which we then get the full cost, and their home district has the gap, kind of like we have with Edison.
Just one last comment. You asked about the part about denying special ed services. We can't. If they have a service plan, those service plans are a commitment of service, and oftentimes we inherit service plans from other districts that look a little bit differently than our district, but we attempt to, through an IEP meeting process, negotiate what services look like in our school district.
I just wanted to reiterate your question. So the more special education students you get, the more funding you get. However, you don't get full reimbursement back for the services you provide. So yes, you're correct in that you do incur more costs because the reimbursement is not at the same level as the cost. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I was just wanting to make sure. I've heard this from a number of Denfeld, this question from a number of Denfeld teachers, and so I wanted to make sure to ask, not to hold you up. I know you're hungry, Tanya, but or you were, I don't know. No, I know. So I heard us, in the last couple of years, I've seen an influx in quick trips in our town, and we used to have a lot of holidays. And so I heard this story that at one point in time, for what they had, for lack of a better term, a gentleman's agreement between Holiday and Quick Trip, where Quick Trip had one area and Holiday had another, and someone from the Holiday station accidentally put something in Quick Trip's area, and that's why we have a bunch of Quick Trips here, because there was that line there that was set that they wouldn't come in. So that being said, I think that if there are districts that are sending buses into our district, we should respond and send them back to theirs. So
I do want to say one other thing, though, about the special education budget, because it prompted another thought. That we do not, all staff are staffed on the same formula, or the foundation is the same for all staff. So if you have more special education students in your own building, you don't incur more of the general education costs to support those students. So I guess I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I think that was a misunderstanding I've heard from other folks. I don't know if I said that very well, but.
So that was for Member Welty's question?
It was just tied into the special ed cost.
Okay, great. Sorry, this was the next question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So I would really appreciate the opportunity to see the potential of not the cost out, but if other districts are deciding to come into ours, because I keep hearing about buses coming to neighborhoods. You talk about how buses are coming past your door all the time, and we're talking about with APUs each year. And if it's even that when we talk about 10 more kids per district, when we have, I think that's important for us to be thinking about. So that's my comment.
I have already charged staff with determining what the cost would be to, I said, I called it Buses Beyond Borders. Determine what the costs are and what how many students would have to be on a bus to make up for the cost of the bus, and how many would be likely to get on the bus. So that will determine, probably looking at the students who are already coming to our district from another district, and if we were to send bus routes to pick them up, what would be the likely outcome of, what other people see the bus coming through and start getting on the bus too. They were on vacation last week because, transportation has spring break too, so they're working on that starting today. So.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Could I add to that same topic? I think, wasn't there an article in the paper here a couple of weeks ago about, was it about Renshaw, and they estimated 100 students from our school go to Renshaw.
Yeah, we're keeping it
and
open.
Of course, that's been an issue, and some Renshaw people are not happy about that because, we got to build a new school because we got taking all these Duluth kids. So yeah, it kind of goes both ways, and it's kind of I agree, it's kind of a peculiar situation. I don't think it really helps either school, really, but just agreeing with you.
Thanks. Member Kirby, or Chair Kirby, any comments? Great. You just got your comment, Member Johnson. We'll jump to Member Oswald. Do you have a comment?
Where within this budget process might Nettleton, or not Nettleton parents, but Congdon Park parents find hope for their class sizes? Because I know we've all been invited to come to their PTA meeting to help discuss class sizes, and knowing that we're making these many cuts, but I don't know if there's space within budgets to try to help them also.
I think the fact that none of this touches classroom ratio, it doesn't change teacher to student ratio. We tried to protect that as much as we could. You're right. There's not anything in here that that reduces that farther. And I don't know how we could manage to invest more unless the revenue side was up. If the state budget came through that was greater than our deficit, which isn't likely, or we could maintain some of these cost reductions and reinvest some to really shift class size district wide is a really big number. The average cost of a teacher is $96,000. That's the number that we use, and so it takes a lot. We do want to look at, and you have scheduled a meeting on the 20th for RSP to come and share the demographic or enrollment projection study that they did, and at that time you'll decide whether you're going to go into phase 2 of that study, which looks at how do we start balancing enrollments, and with balancing enrollments we would realize some efficiencies, because there's sites that we spend more on because there's fewer students And so, maybe if we address some of those, there would be some relief there. But until we have a significant investment number, we're not going to be able to reduce those numbers farther.
I just wanted to add that part of the complication at Congdon this year has been an unpredicted growth during the school year. So we staff them with a certain projection. There are over 50 students from what we projected. And part of that has to do with the enrollments that happen throughout the year. So Kathy and I talk quite frequently about the status of their enrollment. And it's very difficult to add a teacher in November, for example. And so it wasn't until around Christmas time where we said we needed to add some additional staffing to address some of the changes in the kindergarten numbers. So we were able to do some partial staffing there. So that has a lot to do, I think, with why Congdon feels a little bit different than other buildings this year. But they were all staffed on the same ratio.
Thank you. Member Leffler-Kemp, question, comment?
Yes, and I hope when we talk more about Congdon, and maybe at that meeting on the 20th, it'll be clear how many kids are coming in and how many are coming out of the attendance area like we've done in the past, because I think there's been a lot of misinformation out there. Can that just be with that comment?
I need to honor the process. Member Welty, it's your turn.
No. I would defer to.
Okay, great. Member Leffler-Kemp.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question about the trades position reductions, 111,000, and can you kind of flesh that out a little bit more? We kind of moved through that one quickly.
We did kind of move through that one quickly because that's an area where we need to have some further conversations, and it's a small enough area that it requires some. I'll say that there was some discussion from people in the trades about retirement, and we don't quite know that yet, but it would be a reduction in FTE in a few areas.
Okay.
Whether that happens or not.
Member Welty, you're good? I just had one additional question about, I've been tracking this. My comment was I was glad to see the piece on looking at our staff and honoring them for the elementary lunch monitor meals. I think that shows a sign of looking district-wide at what we're providing for staff and make sure that we're honoring staff and where they are. So that was a good eye on the process and ensuring staff are fed too. Chair Kirby, any questions? Member Johnston?
Yeah. And this is, as Member Oswald said, as we all know, it's kind of depressing. I have this fantasy someday that I will come here and have a budget surplus. It did happen once, yeah. It wasn't very big, but I apologize for saying this, but I will again. I'm sure everybody's going to know what I'm going to say, but it's a question it's a statement which does not get old. I've talked to everybody about the $3.3 million that we're paying for our long-term debts out of the general fund. We're the only school in the state of Minnesota that does that. I think it is crippling us. I know I've said this. I apologize for saying it again, but whenever I see this kind of stuff, I say, there's got to be an answer. I've thrown out several scenarios on how we can eliminate that. And everybody just kind of looks at me and says, oh, gee, we can't do it. We can't do it. It's too hard, or something says that, or we can't do anything. Well, I guess it's frustrating for me. Sorry, folks, I'm frustrated that I keep hearing that. And I will work on everything that I can, but I do need help from people to change that. I need ideas. I need brainstorming. I really don't want to be here again. And I know last year we talked about this. People said, well, we'll support this budget, but some people said, well, but we're expecting next year to try to not to have to look at this $3.3 million again. And it's frustrating. And I know there's not an easy answer, but this is big. This is big. This is what we're doing. This is our children. This is our staff. This is the people that we're paying money to. And we got to find some way to solve that. I need your help. I need all your help.
Thank you. Member Oswald? I'm just going to comment on what Member Johnson just said. Is it was part of our legislative platform. We still have time to lobby for it. The way I put it in my emails to my Congress people is you can give us these 7 other things, or you can give us this one thing, because this one thing could take care of the 7 other things. It's where do you want to put your effort? Maybe that's not the answer. Maybe it is something else. It's about finding a different place, a different fund or pot of money to pay it from that doesn't rob it from our classrooms. And that's plain and simple. We'd have a greater district than what we do already if we could save that money.
Member Leffler-Kemp?
I just had another question here on the section about district level administration and support staff, and where you have staff reductions around transportation. And I guess I'm given some of the comments sometimes that have been made about our transportation department. I just want to clarify what you're seeing those staff reductions coming from in that area.
Is that a similar answer to
Is it a similar answer?
It's a similar answer.
Okay, and I appreciate that. It kind of wasn't clear, so, okay.
And, as you all know, we've been making cuts for a long time. And, with a organization that is mostly people, it's difficult. And, Member Welty's comments about so much coming from curriculum and instruction, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at all areas. Other areas don't have as large of a staff, and so, but looking at those areas and making sure that we are kind of addressing all of the areas and not putting it all in curriculum instruction where the majority of our people are.
Thank you. Member Welty? Member Kirby? Member Johnston? Member Oswald? Member Leffler-Kemp?
I just want a kind of a general comment back to the planning process. I appreciated that you talked a little bit about the quality steering committee and the quality leadership teams, and I appreciated the brainstorming that went on as your liaison to the quality steering committee. I was at the meetings and I heard staff talk a lot about a lot of brainstorming about adding 10 more students per school. And one of the things that I appreciated was whether they were a teacher or they were a principal, there was a lot of good ideas that didn't cost a lot of money, but it talked about the narrative that we as a district have with what we are doing well in our schools. And I agree with you that it's hard to look at this budget, but I also get hopeful in terms of increasing revenue by increasing kids back in our district or to our district by us really raising up. I know you all think I'm too rosy all the time, but I really appreciated, as part of the planning process, our staff thinking about what is in our control and what they can be doing to help raise up what we are doing well and what we are investing in. And so I guess kind of a general comment, I wanted to share that.
I have to say that, no, you're
Member
wrong.
Welty
Thinks I'm too hairy.
Oh.
Not going there.
All right, well, to shave our comments a little bit down. Yes, puns. Members of the board, one question is that we've had a significant amount of discussion tonight. Not a lot will change in the direction of what could happen with our administration between Monday and Wednesday. Are we okay with not meeting on Wednesday and having this continued discussion at the board meeting on Tuesday? Can I just get some nods? Okay, so we will not be meeting Wednesday. Okay. So if you have questions about the budget, please make sure to email administrative staff and ensure that they're included. So that closes the placeholder section. And our informational, when it comes to sale of property, that kind of actually goes back to that question earlier on the Rockridge area. With regard to expenditure contracts, Doug handed out a form that, with regard to the email last week, if you have direct questions for him, he's available to, or do you want to just, do you have like a 3-second light, please? Thanks.
Real briefly, earlier we talked about the bricklayer and the flooring installation and a number of other categories of work that need to be done on an annual basis. Here are some more. And these more that show up on this memo are ones that were put out to bid, quote, a year ago. And as part of that process, we have the option of extending for a year. And that is what we are planning to do. And so I just wanted to be real transparent with you to know that these ones were not put out to quote this time, because just as there is the option to renew the others that we talked about tonight, these were put out a year ago, and so that's just what I'm doing. And if you have input on that, I'd be happy to hear that. But I just wanted you to be aware of where we are planning to go with these. We think these are good relationships we have at good pricing, and did not feel the need to get back into them. They will be something that we would perhaps be quoting next year.
These could be in year 2 or year 3. It just depends on where they're at in the cycle.
All right.
So they'll be going out next year or the year after.
Okay.
Thank you. Member Welty, a question?
Yeah, one question on the contracts here. There's one for
What page?
asbestos repair. This is page 110. It looks to me on page 111 that this is a cost of $3,360, a little bit of modest minor repair. Is that the cost that we're anticipating for the contract? That's number 2 on page 111. My 111, you have the same thing there.
This was a quote to do patch and repair in the attic here in this building for asbestos, and that's the estimated cost.
That is, okay.
Correct.
Is that your only questions?
That's it.
All right. Member Johnston?
Are we to the end of the agenda, or where are we at?
We are on contracts, on item 6.
Oh, okay. Okay, I do have a question. Yeah, this is a discussion we've had some about us on page 72 at least, and that's the interquest detection canines.
Member Jensen, we're going to be discussing this tomorrow during the assistant superintendent report. She's giving an update on the interquest canines. So we'll put a pin in the chat and have a full discussion tomorrow during our education committee meeting. That will also relate to the business committee, but she's not here at this time and has a lot of the more information for that. But I asked about that in advance. Yes, it'll be discussed tomorrow. Thank you. Member Oswald.
I just have a question about the TKDA playground contract on page 122 at Stowe, 122. I guess my question, I have a question and I guess more of a comment. My question is where exactly at Stowe is this playground being built? Is it taking out both the old playgrounds? Is it, because I've heard from other people that it might be put in front of the school.
Member Oswald, this process or this proposal is removing the old playground, which was not replaced during the long-range facility plan, and replacing it with the district standard. If you looked at Lester Park or Piedmont, that exact playground will be in that location of the big playground.
Okay, so will the small playground still remain there?
The small playground will remain, but our intent, if we can afford to, will be to remove the equipment because it's not CPSC compliant at this time.
Okay, and have you communicated with the Gary Community Club about access and summer use, because that is like the only play facility in Gary and it's used heavily, and I know people have reached out to me from the community club asking me about where can the kids play. Is there anything that we can offer to help, being that we won't have a playground for them to play on and use in the summer, even though it's our property, but they use it because it's the shack's right there. Are there options that can be explored? I guess
district-wide, we won't have a playground anybody can use this summer. So we're out of luck on every playground.
I understand that, but Gary is unique in that it's very isolated, so that's why I was asking. I guess the second comment is on 125. The item 2, in that if they use outside professional and technical services with cost defined as the amount billed to TKDA plus 10%. Now, I'm not an expert in the red plan, but I know that there was about a 10% charge on services that Johnson Controls had used in the past, and I want to know if this is normal. Or is it exorbitant, because there's been accusations that Johnson Controls charging 10% for overseeing other people subcontracting through them? Do you get where I'm going?
Correct. Almost every contract we have, if a general contractor has a sub-consultant, they'll mark it up 10%.
So 10% is like an industry rate, even though we talked earlier that they marked it down to 6% on the other contractor discussing.
No, I would consider that standard, and the work that you see right here will be minimal.
Sure. Okay. I just wanted to clarify before.
Thank you.
I understood it all.
Member Johnston.
Sure, I got to chip in on that one, Dave. Sorry to disagree, but I don't have any problem with KRT, KDA. It's not an issue with them, and this is a small contract. But yeah, the 10%, that is problematic. I know we had the big argument on Johnson Controls here a couple years ago. Member Welty and I brought it up. And again, with all the contracts I've done for the federal government, we never have an add-on to subcontractors.
Thank you.
And so it is unusual, and I would suggest here that we quit doing that as a rule. And I don't know, if you've got any experience in Illinois, what they do, or is it Indiana? Sorry. But anyway, those are fighting words.
Great. Seeing no.
But anyway, yeah. If any discussion on that, I really think that's something on a small contract not important here. But
we for example, at Rockridge, as on my cover letter shows, everything is excluded geotechnical and site survey. So we're individually contracting with that typically, and this TKDA contract, I'm not sure where you were talking about, Member Oswald.
It's number 2.
Oh, number 2.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is a small contract, and I don't expect this to be a high amount. But for Rockridge or any other projects, we would geotechnical, site survey, additional subcontractor type services we would contract on our own.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further lights, we are adjourned.